Hello. This is the second part in an extensive analysis of Fallout 4. If you have not yet seen the first part, I recommend watching it before continuing with this one, though if you just want to skip it, that's fine too. This video will contain spoilers for Fallout 1, 2, 3, New Vegas, and, of course, Fallout 4, as well as Morrowind, Oblivion, and Skyrim. In addition, there are spoilers for the following pieces of various entertainment media. Proceed at your own risk. This part of the intro is a bit of a last-minute addition. I wanted to talk a bit more about objectivity. I'm not perfect, there may be things I miss or fail to see, and I want these videos to be as accurate as possible. That said, I'm fairly certain I'm not wrong with various pieces of evidence I present to these videos and the conclusions I come to as a result. In the first part of this analysis series, I had said right at the beginning that not only is Fallout 4 a bad game, but it's an objectively bad game. I 100% stand by this statement, and the goal of these videos is to prove how I've come to this conclusion. That's not to say people can't enjoy this game for their own subjective reasons. I'm not going to begrudge anyone or tell them they're wrong for liking Fallout 4, or anything really. While I find it hard to understand how some people might enjoy something I consider objectively flawed, I won't hold it against them. That said, an argument can absolutely be made for the objective quality of any piece of media. There are many things presented in Fallout 4 that I consider to be objective flaws in some way, such as things that blatantly contradict previous games, or even other information provided in Fallout 4 itself, or things presented with little to no explanation for why things are that way. They just are. You'll see a lot of this in this video, but you've seen some of it already with the previous part of the analysis. A clear example is Kellogg being a cyborg. The reasoning is just thrown out in a line of dialogue and tucked away in a terminal, but it isn't expanded upon or referred to in any way ever again. And when you do look deeper into it on that terminal, intending to answer a question, you find it raises more questions that remain unanswered and therefore flaws in logical consistency. The cybernetics become a plot device to force this part of the story to work, then are thrown away and never even thought of again. Kellogg is a cyborg mercenary that's over a century old? Fine. But where's everyone else who had these enhancements? Is he the only one who got them? Why? Did he have them when he kidnapped Sean? It's never answered, so I'm forced to come to the conclusion based on what were presented. As I explained in the last video, I believe he did have them during the kidnapping because he hasn't aged at all since then. This is under the assumption that cybernetics stop aging, not reverse it. If they can reverse aging, why wouldn't Kellogg look younger, since he'd be closer to his prime? Why would he look exactly as he did when he kidnapped Sean unless the aging process has already been halted when he did kidnap Sean? Since Sean personally cancelled the cybernetics program, he very likely would have had to be in control of the Institute, and therefore an adult. This assumption is based on the fact I don't believe the Institute would let a child run their organization. But again, little to no information is presented to explain these things. They simply are, and you have to accept it. If you think at all about the logistics of how things came to be, you start noticing all these errors and problems because it seems like the writers simply wrote the most basic information into the game to force their story to work, completely without realizing how little sense it makes in the context of the overall world. How is Kellogg not only still alive, but also doesn't look any different after 60 years? I don't know, cybernetics I guess? Why doesn't Sean have these enhancements? He is dying after all. I don't know, maybe he cancelled the project decades ago? What's worse is when people who play the game have to invent their own fan fictions to cover up these mistakes, some going to extreme degrees to do so. A friend of a friend tried explaining that a certain character was a reference to famous outlaw Billy the Kid, because he's a kid named Billy, and I don't know, it makes sense because it's a reference? But this was a massive stretch by a fanboy with unconditional love for the series that he's willing to make up anything on the spot to try to convince himself and others that it's not flawed, and that I and people like me are just toxic entitled haters or something for having the gall to criticize a piece of media for its fundamental flaws. Liking something, regardless of its quality, is fine. But if you have to invent your own reasoning and story out of thin air to make something make sense, then you're doing the writing for the writers, and the base product you've received likely isn't well written. Objective flaws exist. There are facts you can point to and pieces of media to show why something might be bad. Saying it's art or it's subjective is fine to an extent, but there's a point where those arguments are being used as an impenetrable shield to deflect all criticism from something due to personal investment and attachment to that thing. I've also seen people say that Fallout 4 isn't a bad game, it's just a bad Fallout game. I disagree with this statement. Even if you were to remove all the Fallout elements from this game and replace them with entirely new elements, the base story is still massively flawed and broken in countless ways. Also, before I continue, I need to address something from the previous video. The plot hole involving Kellogg referring to both Sean and the leader of the Institute at the time of Sean's kidnapping as the Old Man. The Old Man he's referring to during the kidnapping of Sean is 60 years ago, in case you forgot. The Old Man he's referring to in his Diamond City apartment immediately after that sequence is in the past few days, which means the Old Man he's referring to there is in fact Sean. This means when Kellogg says, the Old Man, he is objectively talking about two different people that he's referring to by the same name. And the thing I have to address here is the fact that this is even worse than I thought before. As it turns out, there's a voice recording of the director of the Institute immediately after the Broken Mask incident, and that director is a woman.
Damn it, Galton, what the hell is going on down there? I have to convene an emergency directorate meeting because of this screw-up. That synth was a prototype. It was absolutely not ready for field testing. The mess it caused in Diamond City threatens decades of work to keep us out of the spotlight. I will be very clear. My legacy as director will not be tarnished by your division's mistakes. I am going to find out exactly who approved any sort of operation above ground, and that person will be held fully accountable.
Sean was kidnapped in 2227, and Broken Mask was in 2229. A difference of just 2 years. As with everything else in this game, there's no more depth to this info than there simply being a recording she made. I can't find her name, predecessor, or successor, how long her term as director was, or when it started or ended. It's plausible that she could be a new director after Sean was kidnapped, but I think Bethesda just fucked up. Once again, they just didn't care and just slapped some random shit together and called it a day. It's really amazing just how awful this game is. It's so bad my rage and hatred has looped all the way back around to the point I'm actually fucking impressed at just how bad they made everything as far as the story goes. With that out of the way, let's get to it. We're now at the part where we can decide which group we want to align with. As a result, I have to talk about each of the factions now, and my god are they rife with issues. For the format I'll be going with here, I'll go through each faction one by one, starting off with general comments, complaints, and things I've noticed about the faction, before moving into their respective main story quest lines, then finally their side quests. The Minutemen are a complete non-entity that doesn't at all feel like a fully realized faction in any sense. Preston is the only member at first, and he immediately promotes you to be their leader. While I get they're on the brink of destruction, even when you do fully revive the Minutemen, it's populated almost entirely by nameless NPCs that don't really do much. When time comes to build the teleporter, if you haven't saved enough settlements for Preston, he straight up tells you can't do it yet because you haven't saved enough settlements yet.
I need your help with these schematics.
Oh yeah? What are they for?
They get me inside the Institute.
The Institute? Why in the world would you want to mess around with them?
They kidnapped my baby.
Damn. That's some bad business. Even for them. I'd like to help, but you know my situation. I've got to deal with the immediate problems first. I haven't forgotten that you need my help. Remind me as soon as you found out what that settlement needed from the Minutemen.
As if he wasn't enough of a fucking meme already, He actually forces you to do his shitty quests. Keep in mind, your character's entire motivation for getting into the Institute is to rescue their kidnapped child. I absolutely refuse to accept that any decent person in this scenario, especially someone like Preston who supposedly really cares about people, would tell a parent, "You've got to wait to rescue your kidnapped child. I need you to help a random group of people you don't know first." You're the fucking leader of the Minutemen. Why can't you tell Preston to go fuck himself? Why can't you do literally anything besides follow his orders? He promotes you to be the leader, but you have no actual decisions to make as the leader. You just do as he says as if he's the leader anyways. You are the faction leader of the Minutemen in name only. Even as you claim settlements on the map, it doesn't feel like the Minutemen ever become a substantial force. Most of these people are just worthless dirt farmers and not soldiers. They're entirely useless entities to fill the world that can't do anything for themselves. The game also seems to expect you to arm and armor them all yourself, which means collecting armor and weapons off of every enemy you kill to do so. This just becomes exceedingly tedious, especially when your inventory is likely already full of your own equipment, as well as whatever random junk materials you're hoarding to dump into the next settlement building workstation you find. More on settlements as a whole later. So, there's a whole 8 quests to the Minutemen's part in the main story. The first intersects with the earlier part of the main story, where we save Preston and his crew from the Museum of Freedom. I don't know if I really have much else to say on this quest. It can technically be skipped if you know what to do and just beeline it to the vault Nick is in. But you have to do it if you're doing the Minutemen path. The next quest is a Radiant quest. Trust me, Radiant quests will have a whole section to themselves later on. For now, let's just say it's really fucking lazy to put a Radiant quest, some of the worst quests you can ever put into an RPG, in part of not only one of the main faction storylines, but potentially the main storyline as well if you decide to side with the Minutemen. Following that is a quest where you retake the castle for the Minutemen. This is a straightforward quest that isn't particularly interesting in any way. You just show up and kill some Mirelurks and a Mirelurk Queen. In fact, this quest is more annoying than anything because you also have to go around the entire castle and deal with every nest of eggs, which spawns a couple baby Mirelurks. Following that, you just kinda have to be away from the castle for a few days so it can get cleaned up by nameless NPCs, before getting the quest Old Guns. As it turns out, the castle has a whole armory that's locked behind a big metal door. To access this armory, you have to clear some rubble from a tunnel, using the settlement building feature, and go through the underground to reach it. Again, this is a rather straightforward quest, but I've actually got a lot more to say here. If you can use your settlement building powers to remove the rubble, why can't you just remove the door? You have the ability to scrap entire collapsed houses or nuclear-powered cars, among a whole bunch of other things, but you can't remove the door? I get the door is the whole reason this exists as a quest, but they didn't even do anything unique or interesting with this. You fight a sentry bot, dodge some landmines, and reach the other side. In fact, you somehow find the perfectly preserved corpse of the former leader of the Minutemen down here. Fucking what? Now, I wasn't quite sure how long he had been there. The Mirelurks have obviously been in a castle for a while at this point. You know, possibly a few months or maybe even a year? But for the sake of accuracy in doing this analysis, I decided to be thorough here and actually look to see if I can find exactly when he died. The info I found, using the Fallout Wiki, refers to the Fallout 4 Vault Dweller Survival Guide, which is just a fancy title for the official walkthrough guide for this game. From this book comes a snippet of information that says the castle was taken from the Minutemen by the Mirelurks in 2240. For a point of reference, Fallout 4 takes place in 2287, meaning he likely died approximately 47 years before the events of the game. This is even listed on his page on the Fallout Wiki. Despite dying no less than 40 years prior to 2287, McGann shows no signs of decomposition. Wow. Even if this little tidbit of information happens to be wrong, since it's from a strategy guide and technically not an official source, The guy has been dead for a very long time. But this is actually backed up by Ronnie Shaw herself, who says,
There's no point in getting all sentimental about something that happened 40 years ago.
you make your way into the armory, and considering what Ronnie Shaw said about it, this armory is pretty lackluster. Apparently by schematics, she meant just one. Also a couple of traps you can't actually move or use for some reason. It would have been a lot more interesting if, for example, there was actual unique equipment in here for modifying or crafting items. Several unique blueprints instead of just one, and other goodies, or even equipment your settlers could use to improve their arms and armor on their own. Or where they could work on making something new. What we get is a single new workshop item, the artillery cannon. You build one and test it as part of the quest, and it seemed pretty worthless to me, so I never actually used it beyond simply finishing this quest. Basically how it works is you toss a smoke grenade, and artillery fire rains down upon the spot. But there's a range limit on this, I think, and I don't know what that range is. I honestly didn't care about this item, so I didn't build one at every single settlement to see if it would be effective all through the wasteland. I had to use the wiki again for this one, and the range is said to be 5 grid spaces, whatever that means, from the nearest settlement. I understand the grid spaces is how it works in the editor, but you can't possibly know that when you're in-game itself. What this means is they're only really effective if you're already relatively close to a settlement. Which actually does make some logical sense. I'm actually surprised they thought of that. But at the same time, this can also largely invalidate the whole point of building the artillery guns, making them effectively useless unless you're in a situation very near to a settlement. Next is the quest Inside Job, which intersects with the one from earlier where you actually make your way into the Institute. This entire quest is putting a holodisk into a computer, downloading data, and giving it to Sturgis once you leave. I really can't say anything about this quest because there's nothing else to it. You just press a couple of buttons and talk to a character. Next is Form Ranks. In this quest, if you haven't gotten enough settlements yet, Preston tells you to go get some, to build up the Minutemen's ranks. Basically, this fucking meme of a character tells you to go help another settlement several times. Fucking what? Following that is Defend the Castle, where the Institute decides for literally no reason to assault the castle in force in an attempt to wipe out the Minutemen because reasons. Strangely enough, this doesn't happen to the Brotherhood or the Railroad. Sean must really care about his last surviving parent to try to kill them in this way. In all fairness, if you decline to join the Institute, your character will tell Preston that we're going to war with the Institute, but even then it's not explained why. It's just something that happens for some reason. There's one more quest to the main story, but I can't talk about it right now. I'll talk about it in a bit, at the end of this section after we go through the other factions. Finally, we've got the Minutemen side quests, and there's really nothing I can say here about the actual quests. Legitimately, the only quests they have are, you guessed it, saving settlements. Oh, and the quest I talked about in the previous video where Mama Murphy tells you the future. You can convince her to quit drugs and lose the sight, or you can get the single greatest reward offered in this game if you keep giving her drugs. She will eventually die. You know, it says an awful lot about a faction when they have no real storyline, and the majority of their listed quests end in location name. Hey, here's an idea. You know how Preston Garvey said the Minutemen were basically broken in Quincy? Why not have a questline dedicated to undoing the mistake that brought the Minutemen to the brink? It may not be related to the main story, sure, but it would go a long way to add some character to the Minutemen and Preston Garvey himself. Maybe he could get some closure on the events that happened there. Why did the Gunners even want Quincy? What was their goal? Did the Gunners realize Preston needed a tragic backstory and thus participated in the destruction of the one thing Preston was written to care about? The Minutemen? Why are we given this big story and nothing done with it? Other characters in the game don't even seem to know or care that it happened, including the journalist, probably the one single person whose job it is to know such things.
Shh. Play along.
What's that? You said you're a traitor up from Quincy? You have enough supplies to keep the general store stocked for a whole month? You hear that, Danny? You gonna open the gate and let us in, or are you gonna be the one talking to crazy Myrna about losing out on all the supply?
Jeez, alright. No need to make it personal, Piper. Give me a minute.
This gets even worse when you realize the massacre at Quincy was over a month before the start of the game. At Diamond City, Piper's lie to get the door open is that a trader from Quincy with a month's worth of supplies wants in. No one noticed the lack of traders in over a month? Quincy is a big town, big enough to rival Bunker Hill or Goodneighbor. You're telling me no one noticed this town getting wiped off the map? The Gunners even went as far as to send off a group to try to track down Preston and the remaining survivors to wipe them out. Fucking why? What motivation was there for them to kill off a random group of survivors who abandoned the town they took over? Was it petty vengeance? Having a well-written questline around this could have been good for the game. Hell, with Preston's obsession with settlements on the map, you'd think Quincy would be a prime target to take back and restore. Instead of the way it's handled now where you have to go to save location name from a random group of baddies, why not make the other settlements more interesting and unique? The Minutemen get to become a real force in the wasteland. You get to actively see their presence grow, patrolling roads, getting into battles against the various monsters, raiders, and synths that roam the lands. The castle gets fully repaired, and a few settlements, probably the castle and Concord, are established as major Minutemen bases of operations. They begin running caravans, making alliances with Bunker Hill, Diamond City, and potentially other groups. And it's a grand finale, the Minutemen launch a coordinated assault upon the Gunners in Quincy and take it back in a crushing victory. This could even lead into a war against the Gunners as a whole and potentially wipe them out as a force in the wasteland, taking their bases of operation and resource, further strengthening the influence of the Minutemen. One of the Gunner groups is squatting in a vault, for Christ's sake, which would be an insanely valuable asset to the Minutemen in both terms as a resource and a settlement for people to live. It's safe and sheltered, not outside in some crap shack. The only presence I've seen of the Minutemen in the actual game is some groups of them fighting synths in random outdoor locations after you defeat the Institute. The next faction I'll be talking about is, of course, the Institute. And my god are there a lot of issues here. I legitimately have no idea where to even start here, so I'm just going to jump in. The Institute is presented as sort of a boogeyman to the wasteland, to the point I thought they might not even really exist, and it was just people's paranoia at work. Then I met Nick and thought, well, maybe the Institute was just being blamed for the evil shit they're being accused of. It can't be a more logical solution. It must be this secretive group we know nothing about. I'll be honest, some of the paranoia around the Institute and synths was actually handled fairly well. At least until you realize there's no depth to it. It's a shame, then, that it all goes to waste, and the rest of the faction in nearly every conceivable way makes absolutely no goddamn sense. One of the best examples is in the synths themselves, and even getting onto the topic of synths is one of the biggest cans of worms this game has, besides the main story itself. Let's rewind 10 years to the events of Fallout 3. There's a quest in this game called The Replicated Man, in which the Institute is hunting down an escaped synth that went so far as to get facial reconstruction surgery to avoid being identified and captured. I bring this up to establish a point of reference, that synths escaping the Institute has been a problem for no less than a full decade. This is an absolute fact. At this point in writing the analysis, I actually took a break to go back and check exactly what was said in Fallout 3. To my surprise, the Institute is actually mentioned if you pressure Zimmer enough, but he hardly comments on it. As it turns out, Harkness is some kind of unique model courser that decided to escape. He apparently felt guilt about capturing other escapees. Yes, that's right. Harkness was not a unique case. Synths were escaping in such magnitude 10 whole years ago that the courser class of synth was created prior to the events of Fallout 3. Worse than that, Harkness is a new model of courser, which implies this has been an issue for significantly longer than a mere 10 years. Even Zimmer's bodyguard, Armitage, is a courser, which itself is strange since the Institute in Fallout 4 does not give names to their synths. I had brought up this quest in Fallout 3 as a lead-in to the whole problem of synths escaping the Institute. In all honesty, I sort of forgot about the replicated man in Fallout 3 until doing my research for the sake of this analysis. While talking about the synths with a friend, I'd recalled that Harkness was a robot, as well as how much I hated this quest just because finding a random holotape prompts a uppity bitch to track you down and harass you out of nowhere. I remembered Zimmer mentioning the Commonwealth and just connected the dots there. I had only intended to use Harkness as a standalone example, but this info from Zimmer only compounds the issue. How is the Institute so incompetent that synths are regularly escaping them for what I can only assume is well over a goddamn decade? As we learn, there's one way in and one way out. Teleportation. Why not put some armed fucking guards there? You seem to have no shortage of old model synths that are in fact robots in the truest sense of the word. Just put a dozen of them in there. I'm sure no one will be escaping then. Hell, put the elevator on lockdown or require a code unique to each member of the Institute so you could track who is accessing it. How do synths even manage to escape? This problem doesn't exist with the old models. Nick Valentine says he was trashed himself, so it's not like he escaped despite quite literally having the memories and personality of a pre-war human shoved into him. The Institute considers them to just be robots, right? Then why give them a free will? Even when pressed on the issue, the Institute still seems to believe that they have no free will, that they're just defective machines. Fucking how? Additionally, this completely ignores confirmation bias. You'd think if they truly want to replicate humans, they'd be ecstatic at the mere implication that synths can feel real emotion or could have desires. What fucking logical sense does this make? Is everyone in the Institute a brain-dead moron? The coursers are agents designed to hunt down escapees. If that's the case, are coursers going rogue too? Harkness did, and we see one in Far Harbor, but is that the extent of it? How is it the coursers are more resistant to this flaw? Why not use this knowledge to isolate the exact problem? Why not make all synths coursers?
The SRB constantly monitors our Gen 3 synth population, looking for specific traits. Those who show tenacity, fearlessness, and independence undergo a rigorous training regimen. We teach them armed and unarmed combat, investigative techniques, psychology, and mechanical skills. Those who pass a final evaluation become coursers. The rest have their memories wiped and return to their former duties.
Tenacity? Fearlessness? Independence? That sure does sound like they've got some level of personality to me. After all, a robot can't fear. Its default state should be fearlessness. Oh, wait, only certain synths qualify for becoming coursers and receive special training? Fucking what?! You have the power to fucking spawn programmable people. Why do you need to give training to existing robots to make them coursers? What advantage is there to giving your robots personalities when it makes them run away? Hell, why do you even need to make such humanoid robots when you're mostly just using them for labor? Just make them Mr. Handy. This is the problem with the Institute. The more you look at it, the more it just breaks down. This started happening earlier when you first meet Father, and it just spirals out of control the more you look at it. I'm going over a hell of a lot in this section, and I don't doubt for a single second that I'm still missing a plethora of issues because there's just so goddamn many of them. Some may call this nitpicking, but I believe it ceases to be nitpicking when there's this many issues. Besides, to call something nitpicking is to hand-wave legitimate issues simply because they're not big enough. An issue exists regardless. I'm not going to just completely ignore an issue because some people think it's too small to complain about, but at least in this case there's so many of them it's a death by 1,000 cuts. The synths as a whole are broken in nearly every way. The issue with the synths goes so deep I have to make a new section just for this. A section I call The Case of 3 Synths. These synths are Nick Valentine, Roger Warwick, and Art. I'm dedicating an entire segment of this video solely to discussing this issue. So they give synths personalities, eh? How do they do this? How does it work? We hear from Nick that his personality was a brain scan of a pre-war cop. He has all the memories, morals, beliefs, and feelings of this random cop.
My memories, my personality, they're all lifted from some cop who volunteered for an experiment back before the war. They scanned his brain and copied it onto the hardware that runs between my ears.
Is this the Institute's preferred method? Oh wait, apparently not. Because when they replaced Roger Warwick, he went through a series of intensive interrogation sessions? Huh? We don't actually get to see this happen, so I can only assume they mean actual interrogation, rather than it being some kind of weird code word for brain scan, when they could just use the words brain scan. So, are these synths not exact copies then? If it was possible to scan a human brain pre-war and shove its memories into a robot synth, why can't this be done now? If they've got the technology to implant a pre-war brain scan into Nick Valentine, why can't they just use this technology with Roger? Sure, they didn't create the brain scan tech, but surely they can use or recreate the pre-war tech needed to do it. There is no reason given on why this cannot be done. As for the interrogation, how deep do they go on the past and memories of these people? What are their intensive interrogation methods? It seems like this would lead to wildly inaccurate results. What if being under the stress of being an Institute prisoner and an interrogation subject, he forgot some important details about his life? What if the real Roger Warwick had a long-lost childhood friend who meant Synth Roger, who didn't recognize the friend? That might raise some red flags for people. Wait, how long was Roger gone for? They say a series of interrogation sessions, which implies there's some sort of extended break between them, like several hours or a day or something. Did his family not notice him missing? Were they not concerned when he returned, what with the paranoia of people being replaced with synths in the Commonwealth? If there's such a problem with synths escaping, why doesn't the Roger synth want to escape? It sure is a good thing this surface agent is loyal to the Institute when he's in possibly the best position to escape. What happened to the original Roger Warwick? Is he dead? Did the Institute kill him? What did they do with his body? Then there's the Art encounter, a random event in the Commonwealth where a human named Art and his synth counterpart are in some kind of conflict with each other, either actively fighting, or one is holding the other at gunpoint. I thought the Institute needed the original human to base their synth off of. These two guys have the exact same reaction when the other is dead, but one of them is a synth. If they're not already fighting when you find them, one of these guys claims to be a synth working for the Institute and needs to replace the original human. Fucking what? So the Institute needed to do a series of interrogations on Roger Warwick to find out everything about him to plant in the Roger synth's memories so they could replace the original with the synth. But they didn't need to with these guys? They also couldn't do a brain scan either, like with pre-war Nick. Neither of them has any dialogue saying they were captured by the Institute, so I'd have to assume that's the case. Fucking what? On top of that, it wouldn't make any sense for the Institute to release a human they intend to replace, then send the synth to replace him. But Fallout 4 is so nonsensical, it's an option I had to consider. Regardless, no such lines exist as far as I'm aware. Nick tells us the Institute has a failsafe on other synths that erases their memories of the Institute in case they escape. Why doesn't the failsafe just shut them down? Why isn't there programming to detect free will or disdain towards the Institute or a desire to escape? Why the fuck would you make programmable people with personalities and not expect them to escape? But wait, there's more! Apparently some of these synths have trackers in them.
A raider gang just hit one of our scavenger teams. The bastards captured a Gen 1 synth. Our tracking shows that it's still functioning, but we don't have the assets to spare for a rescue.
Alright, fine, that makes sense. At least until the point you realize not all of them have these trackers. What? Fucking why? What benefit is it to build synths en masse without a tracking device when they regularly escape? Even Detroit Become Human throws in a line about how the trackers and androids stop working when they become deviants.
You know what's strange? For some unknown reason, the trackers seem to stop working in Deviants. That's why it's so hard to find them.
I just had to give credit to a fucking David Cage game for getting something right that Fallout got wrong. Fuck you! Wait a second. These logs also say all evidence of their project at the Warwick homestead will be purged once the project is complete. Does this mean they intend to kill the entire family and everyone else settling there? Even the children?
And not just the men, but the women. And the children, too.
Oh. This brings me to another issue. Once you actually meet the Institute, it's presented in another light. Instead of being the horrible monsters you hear from people on the surface, the Institute itself and everyone in it claims that what they're doing is for bettering the future of mankind. And they're all really nice people, for the most part. How is heartlessly slaughtering a family who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time bettering the future of mankind? How does kidnapping or replacing random people on the surface better the future of mankind? I realize some of the surface synth agents are meant to control the people to some extent, like the mayor of Diamond City, to try to reduce or prevent any threat to the Institute, but it seems like kidnappings are a pretty frequent and random thing, and there doesn't always seem to be a reason for it. Their choice in people to replace is so seemingly random that nameless settlers in your settlements could be synths. Not to mention they've been kidnapping surface dwellers and turning them into super mutants for years. Is the Institute of the sorts of the Commonwealth's super mutants? Oh, apparently they are. Had to check the wiki again for this one. Unfortunately, it's impossible for me to find every scrap of info on my own. Why would they do this? What benefit is there to mankind to release super mutants onto the surface? Wouldn't some of these super mutants interfere with your surface operations?
We fell on some hard times not long ago. A pack of super mutants hit us and wrecked our entire crop. Used to be the Minutemen would have helped us out, but last I heard they were too busy fighting each other to worry about us farmers. So we were on our own, all of us starving near to death.
What if Synth Roger Warwick got killed by a super mutant? If power is such a limited resource for the Institute, why would they waste so much energy teleporting super mutants to the surface?
Absolutely. We scratch and scrape for every precious ounce of voltage that we can. Over the years, we've learned a few tricks that help supplement our power budget. When necessary, we can tap into select sources on the surface. We take only what we need, of course. Fortunately, Advanced Systems is always working on new solutions to generate more energy. It's a good thing, too, because the demand is always increasing. You don't even want to know what a single use of the molecular dematerializer consumes.
Wait, the people that get kidnapped to be replaced by synths, does the Institute turn them into super mutants when they're done interrogating them? Is the real Roger Warwick a super mutant on the surface now? Is this Roger Warwick? Hold on. The Institute has the same problem with their FEV experimentation as the Master did in Fallout 1. That irradiated humans result in dumb super mutants. And the Institute kidnapped Sean because they needed a pure human to base their sense on, and none of the Institute personnel would have worked because they had all been tainted themselves, right? Then how is Virgil a smart super mutant? Was he a pure human too? If so, then how? Was he from a vault? If he wasn't a pure human, then how did he come out of exposure to FEV with his sanity, personality, and intelligence intact? Where did he come from? If pure humans are needed for the FEV testing, why didn't the Institute leave people alive in Vault 111 to use for later? If they came to the conclusion that irradiated people result in unexpected deviations or problems in their projects, synth or otherwise, you'd think they'd have instead used some of their prime selection of pure humans. Oh wait, no, they killed them all because reasons. Sure, prime human DNA is an extremely rare thing. Let's just waste an entire supply of it with no goddamn due date for no reason. Fucking why? Again, how does releasing super mutants upon the surface help anyone in any way? It only serves to make the surface all the more dangerous. I realize the Institute believes they're the future of humanity, but that doesn't mean they have to make the Commonwealth even more dangerous for those who aren't inside the Institute. Virgil says they've learned nothing for the super mutant program in years, well over a decade. How long have they been pumping super mutants into the wasteland? How many innocent people were turned into these monsters? How many innocent people were killed as a direct result of super mutants being released upon the surface? Wait a second. I see no mention of FEV testing on dogs, so where do the mutant hounds come from? The super mutants on the surface don't have access to FEV, like the Mariposa super mutants did in Fallout 1, or the Vault 87 super mutants in Fallout 3. So how did they have mutant dogs? Did the Institute create them too? Why? More to the point, why can't you talk to literally anyone about any of this in any capacity? Everyone just treats everything as business as usual. You cannot even ask in most cases. Things simply are, and that's it. This is where this shit gets absolutely goddamn infuriating. You see all the Institute's dirty laundry, and it's hard-coded that you can't ask or tell anyone about it in any capacity. The Super Mutant program was shut down because of Virgil, and you don't even have to go there once you've gotten the cure for him. Out of sight, out of mind. You don't actively engage in taking people or having people taken from the surface to be replaced. It's just already all done. You're not killing innocent people, and neither is the Institute at the moment. Recovering escaped human-like synths? Not something you have to do beyond the first 2 quests. The first one is the leader of a raider gang. This is to prove to you how dangerous escaped synths can be. Fucking what? Raiders were a problem regardless of any synth being a part of their group. A reprogrammed escapee can be literally anything, from a trader to a Brotherhood paladin to a mechanic to a raider. One escaped synth going raider doesn't mean they all will, or that they're all dangerous. A synth is literally just a stand-in for a human. A raider synth is no more dangerous than a raider human. You can't fight back against the Institute's perception that synths aren't people in the slightest, and they go out of their way to present everything differently to you, the player, to make it feel like you sided with the good guys. It's like the Institute itself was recontextualized after you join them, so it doesn't feel to the player as if they're choosing a bad guy faction. Once again, New Vegas did this better. Caesar's Legion do some truly awful things and are antagonistic. They're the current threat to the Mojave, but some can argue they're not entirely evil, that they just want to build a better world and their way of dealing with it is really violent and harsh. But their actions are not recontextualized or hand-waved or entirely forgotten once you join them, and they are presented as some kind of innocent group. When you join the Institute, all the horrible stories of the things they've done begin to sound like a myth or like propaganda against the Institute, when everything you've heard and worse has happened. Roving bands of old model synths go to the surface to scavenge for resource. Apparently they're so violent they've wiped entire towns off the map as a result. Inside the Institute, there's no perception of this. It's just a team of synths being deployed to gather resource. Most of the Institute's problems are a direct result of the Institute itself. Maybe there would be less fear, paranoia, and hatred of the Institute if they weren't so intent on kidnapping and replacing people, or sending out vicious armies of synths to kill everything in their path to collect resource. It can be argued that the people within the Institute are simply sheltered and unaware of the damage they're causing, but how can they not understand they're holding the entire Commonwealth back and hurting everyone as a direct result of their actions? No one would fucking hate the Institute if the Institute didn't pose a direct threat to the lives and well-being of quite literally every single person on the surface. Most infuriating of all, members of the Institute have the audacity to say the surface dwellers have nothing to fear from them. But this goes deeper than that. The paranoia surrounding the Institute arises from the Broken Mask incident, in which the first of the human-like synths that were sent to the surface went to Diamond City, acted normal for a while before going mad and killing people. This is where the people of the Commonwealth realized that the Institute's synths had advanced to the point of being indistinguishable from normal humans. This is followed up a year later by the Institute intentionally wiping out the representatives of the Commonwealth Provisional Government to prevent a government institution from rising up in the wasteland, effectively damning everyone on the surface by preventing progress or rebuilding the ruined world. I assume the reasoning here is that the Institute would consider them a threat, but the problem is they wouldn't need to worry about a government rising up if they sided with that government. They were involved with the Commonwealth Provisional Government before, but pulled out due to infighting among the other groups. But there was no reason at this point to hate or fear the Institute. It would have been in their best interest to take control of the situation and unite these settlements while acting as a sort of shadow government. And this would have prevented all of their problems except maybe the Brotherhood, depending on whether they made synths or not. Alright, let me lay this out. The Institute's biggest issues by far are energy, resource, and safety. In Fallout 4, they solved the energy problem by building a nuclear reactor, which doesn't impact the Commonwealth itself, though this could have happened far sooner if they didn't have to operate from the shadows. They gather resource by sending groups of synths to the surface to basically strip mine various locations of old world objects. These synths are violent and engage in combat with random wastelanders, thus contributing to the perception that the Institute is evil. Finally, their safety concerns are all thanks to their own actions. Besides the previous examples, they also kidnap people and replace them with synths to spy on the surface and to control what little government there is. If the Institute had instead been more open and worked with the Commonwealth Provisional Government, controlling things from the shadows, none of this would be an issue. First and foremost, they wouldn't be hated by everyone, as they'd essentially just be another part of the CPG, which immediately reduces the number of people who want to kill them. Secondly, there would be no reason to send out roving bands of violent synths to gather resource. With an organized government in the Commonwealth, they could easily pay a small stipend to scavengers to give them all the junk they can find that the Institute would find useful. Put up job boards saying what particular materials they might need. With no bands of synths destroying entire towns for resource, this further reduces the hate against the Institute, as the threat of being wiped out by mindless robots becomes less of a concern. Furthermore, with a standing government, they could train troops to defend the Commonwealth, including the Institute, from outside threats, and these numbers could be further bolstered by robots or Gen 1 and 2 synths created by the Institute. Basically, the way it actually is in the game, the Institute does everything imaginable to make things harder for themselves and refuse to take any level of responsibility. As far as I could tell, there doesn't even seem to be a reason for creating the synths. Sure, they want to replicate humanity, but why? Synths seem to be the single most important thing to the people of the Institute, but there doesn't seem to be any motivation for this beyond, let's make fake people. If they need someone to do menial tasks or defend the Institute, they could easily make robots based on pre-war versions, or entirely new robots to do these tasks. I realize in a lot of science fiction there could be robots or AI that exist that pass as human, but those cases typically take place in a future where the entire world isn't a fucking nuclear wasteland. See what I mean yet? The Institute is broken on nearly every level I can find. Just going over all these inconsistencies and massive plot holes makes me feel like I'm in a madhouse. It makes me feel like I live in a world where basic logic and common sense do not exist. The worst part is, I'm not even done yet. Not by a long shot. I actually have to break formula here to continue talking about the synths, since this is a side quest for some reason and not a main quest in the Institute. Plugging a leak is a side quest within the Institute to find out how the synths are escaping. As it turns out, the Institute sends groups of them to the surface for some reason. I thought they used the older models for that, but I guess not. Fuck logical consistency. Just accept what you're given and don't think about it. The compositions of the groups being sent is regularly changed to include synths that are at high risk of fleeing. I'm not sure how this is even a thing, since it's very clearly stated numerous times, including in random dialogue between synths and the Institute, that the Institute basically has the power to have them wiped and reprogrammed at a moment's notice. If there are individuals at high risk of fleeing, why not wipe them and reprogram them now so they aren't high risk anymore? What benefit is it to keep these high risk synths around? Also, this is the Grandmaster plan that's been causing synths to escape constantly for well over a decade? The Institute. Full of the supposedly smartest people in the world. couldn't figure this out for well over 10 fucking years? Now, I said this was a quest, but I was generous with that label. This is more akin to doing errands. The entire quest is just you leapfrogging from terminal to terminal until you find out who is behind it. It's supposed to be an investigation, but there aren't even any interesting investigation elements to it. You open a terminal, get your map marker, open that terminal, you get the point. You find Eve, and I don't know why there's a jump scare cue here.
Don't come any closer. I'm sorry that you had to find me here.
Anyways, you talk to her and she says she's trying to protect Liam. You can either kill her or pass a pointless speech check to talk her down. Confronting Liam gives you two whole options. Framing the head of the SRB or reporting that it was Liam, which causes him to be exiled from the Institute, which actually means he's just entirely removed from the game forever. His father has no comments to make on the matter. I don't know how old Liam is, but is he supposed to have been the cause for the synths escaping all this time? He seems pretty young. Was he doing this when he was a teenager? Did the Institute not investigate this any deeper sooner? All the info was literally right there for you to find with zero effort. You find this info on a terminal that the head of the Synth Retention Bureau, the SRB, himself had checked. Did he miss this info? Was it made after? In all this time, did the Institute not change their methods of handling such procedures where synths are sent to the surface? Why wouldn't they have several levels of verification on this to prevent synths escaping? What's that? Oh, the group composition was changed? Why? Who did it? Hey, wait a second. The specific synth is at high risk of escaping. Why is she in this group? We can't let them go out like this. We have to change it back to the original group we were going to send. Maybe, if the Institute had some basic fucking security and verification systems in place, this wouldn't be a problem. Yeah, resource is so scarce that each department has to be extremely careful with energy consumption, and they have to send out groups of synths to gather resource they need from the surface. So instead of putting some basic security measures in place, let's create and devote an entire division of our organization to recapturing our programmable humans to keep escaping when we send them outside. I have seriously written well over 3,000 words on these issues, with the Institute alone. This isn't even getting to their quest line yet. Which, by the way, let's get to that now. There are 9 quests in the Institute path. The first is reclaiming a synth-turned-raider. This quest is extremely straightforward. Go to raider base, kill raiders, reclaim their synth leader. Done. The second quest is the Battle for Bunker Hill, where you're sent to retrieve some escaped synths from a railroad hideout. This ends up becoming a massive firefight between the Institute, the Railroad, and the Brotherhood of Steel, who decided to show up for some reason. There isn't a whole lot to this quest either. You kill enemies, acquire objective. You talk to Sean on the roof of CIT. He says he's never been outside the Institute before now, and it only confirms what he believes, that the Commonwealth is a dead wasteland and isn't worth their time. What? This leads into the next quest. This is less of a quest, but more of a jumping point, I guess, to the next half of the Institute's storyline. You attend a meeting of all the department heads, and they're all nervous you're there. Sean says he's dying. No idea from what, but he appoints you to be the new leader of the Institute. This is your only chance to find out what he's dying from, so if you miss it, like I did, it just appears to be some mystery disease. I'm dying because I'm dying. If you pick the right response, he'll say it's cancer. He just randomly has some vague form of cancer that's giving him only a short time to live, I guess. Following that is mass fusion, which requires you to get a thing from a place. After that is pinned, where you have to kill some guys and talk to this other guy. Then is possibly one of the weakest and shortest quests in the entire game as a whole. You go to Diamond City, plug some parts into their radio broadcasting equipment, and leave. That's it. What? Next is End of the Line. Several times through playing this path, you hear that members of the Institute don't fully trust you yet due to your contact with the Railroad. To go back to what I was saying earlier, was it part of Sean's plan that you meet the Railroad? If so, why would he do this when it could potentially influence your opinion of the Institute? If not, then what was his plan for you to figure out how to get into the Institute? Anyways, he finally says you've got to wipe them out. There's no other way around it. It is just this way because reasons, and that's all we'll ever get, apparently. There's no choice, no chance to work it out, there's no way to talk to them and come to terms with each other, and there's no possible alternate solutions. So we wipe them out. After getting the Courser chip decoded, I had no reason to talk to the Railroad again on the Institute path, so when I finally got to this quest, I went to their base and this happens.
We've heard some very disturbing things about you. That you've been to the Institute. That you're actually working with those monsters. You're lucky we don't shoot you on sight.
Who told you that?
I'm not about to divulge anything sensitive to you. Get the hell out of here, and don't come back.
She's worried about me working with the Institute, but has taken absolutely zero precautions? Like, none of them sat down and thought, you know that person who brought us the Courser chip? I've heard a rumor they're working with the Institute. Maybe we should find a new base of operations and abandon this one just in case? This seems like a pretty big security risk. At the very least, we should maybe not have all our leadership in one convenient location, so we can effectively be wiped out at the drop of a hat. But no, once again, a major group lacks any critical thinking skills. You just walk in and mow them all down because despite being a group that's been around for well over a decade, and has survived at least one major attempt of the Institute trying to wipe them out, they just didn't think that maybe, just fucking maybe, the person who knows where their secret base is known to be working with the Institute might potentially be a threat to their existence. This could have been a small questline in and of itself, where you have to decode their messages and find the other bases. You know, track down the leaders and wipe them out. But no, they're just that fucking stupid apparently. Finally is airship down. It's this big battle with the Brotherhood of Steel where you have to break a few of their toys so synths can teleport in to back you up. You've got to protect a special synth while it reprograms Liberty Prime to shoot down the Brotherhood's blimp. You're teleported across the shore to watch the explosion. There's one more quest after this, but we'll be waiting again. As for the Institute side quests, there's hardly anything here. Just a whole 3 quests, one of which I've talked about already. The other 2 are A House Divided and Building a Better Crop. A House Divided starts after you're declared the new leader of the Institute. Now, I don't know if this glitched for me, but no one actually told me about this quest. It just popped into my quest log and not a single character commented on it. Basically, a couple of guys in bioscience are pissed that you're the new leader and decide to keep all the food they're growing hostage until you're exiled. What? I ignored it at first, just to see if the guys in the bioscience department really were starving out everyone else in the Institute, or if it was just some false empty drama with no weight behind it. I'm sure you can already guess which it was! After finishing the Institute path and still hearing nothing about it, I finally did this quest. You get inside and talk them down, then discuss punishment. Quest over. Their threats and actions don't really have any impact if no one ever cares about what they're even doing. It's interesting to note here that you can not only have them exiled, but you can have them straight up executed here. No one questions your decision, there isn't a discussion or a vote, you are the sole leader of the Institute. It's strange then that you can outright order the actual executions of 2 people, yet can't handle anything else with this faction with as much option, and in fact, cannot change the path of the Institute at all. The quest with Liam I mentioned earlier, I also did that after completing the Institute path of the game. I had almost no option to deal with the conclusion of this quest. You are a leader in name only. Building a better crop is more errand running. You drop off some seeds for Roger Warwick, find out that a couple of other sellers think he's a synth. Track one down the good neighbor to find out he was sent to hire a mercenary. Come back to find Roger being held at gunpoint by the other seller, which you can kill or talk down. Of course, the Institute has Radiant quests as well, but as I've already said, we'll be talking about that later. The next faction we'll be talking about is, naturally, the Railroad. Despite already going into how incompetent the Railroad is, there's still some shit to talk about here. The entire faction as a whole seems like their goals and motivations aren't fully thought out. I mean, I get their goals are to help synths, but this just seems really forced. So the Railroad are a group of humans who, one day, kinda just decided that they should rescue synths from the Institute, even though they have no way of reliably doing this? How do they know they were even helping synths? I thought escaping the Institute triggered the failsafe that erases their memories. How would a synth even know they are a synth at that point? The Railroad has absolutely no way to directly free synths from the Institute, and have no contact with anyone inside. The flow of escaped synths relies entirely on a single person within the Institute. What if he got caught? What if he died? The Railroad would become irrelevant pretty quick. If no more synths were escaping, that means the Railroad wouldn't be able to help them anymore. They might stick around for a bit as an opposition to the Institute, but they'd be left at a dead end. But more than that, in a world where resources are so scarce, people are struggling to survive. How did the Railroad even form? Why did this group of humans unify and decide it was more important to save fake humans than their fellow man? I understand there's an element of morality here, as synths seem to have human-level sapience and not just mere code in a machine. But we're not talking about a world where humans already live rather comfortably. We're talking about a horrible, hellish nuclear wasteland full of raiders and mutated creatures and countless other threats. Where does the Railroad get all their resources from? How has the Institute not dealt with them yet? Hell, the Institute raided their previous headquarters. Surely there was some serious info in there that the Institute can use against them, right? In their new HQ, there's a board that shows what all their symbols are. If they got raided, that info would just be sitting there for the Institute to see. Suddenly, all your call signs and symbols are worthless, in fact, even dangerous since the Institute would know what they all mean. The Railroad just seems like a bizarre house of cards that's somehow still standing in a hurricane. They seem like a disorganized group of assholes who are LARPing as some kind of deep undercover operatives who don't know what they're doing, apparently have the time to stand around in dark rooms all day waiting for someone to guess their password, and have managed to survive on pure luck alone. I cannot overstate how much I hate this faction and everyone in it. Rather than some group of freedom fighters who are constantly under fire and fighting the good fight, they instead come off as a fanatical group of some of the most unlikable characters I've seen in a while.
So is there anyone you like?
Oh, I wasn't aware we were competing for congeniality awards. I thought we were rescuing synths. My mistake.
I'm going to go back to their whole password issue from the last video. So, I'm not an expert in running an underground resistance movement or anything like that, but I can tell you some basic things I do differently from the Railroad to reduce my chances of being wiped out entirely. See, as I mentioned in the previous section, the entire leadership of the Railroad hangs out in one location, their current headquarters. This means they can effectively be wiped out in one fell swoop, which is a stupid tactical move. Logic dictates you'd have parts of your leadership in different underground bases instead of having an established headquarters, so if one gets raided and wiped out, your entire organization doesn't die with you. Let's pull this all the way back to the Switchboard, their previous HQ. It was raided by the Institute. People died and others escaped. If I were in their position, I'd have several locations scouted out as potential new bases in advance if needed. We'd have people scatter after an attack and regroup when it's safe in two of these potential bases. One for the higher ranking and more trustworthy members, and one for the grunts and the newer members you might not trust as much. This would be to prevent potential spies from leaking a new location of the leadership members, and it keeps everyone connected to the wiped out base separate from the other bases to prevent unnecessary risk to them as well. You get the new main base properly established and do some waiting to make sure it's safe. And then deal with all the call signs and stuff when you make a password for your new safe house. Don't make something brain-dead fucking retarded. See, when you face death and outright extermination, it might make sense to take measures to maybe prevent that.
Our HQ was strong, defensible. Heck, we thought it was secure. Inside a minute, The Institute troopers breached the doors and turned it into a shooting gallery. The survivors didn't have time to grab anything. So we're getting something important we had to leave behind.
The switchboard being attacked by the Institute seems to be a rather recent development. I can't say how fast the headquarters in the old church got set up, but they should have waited maybe a few weeks, and they'd have a lot of time to come up with a password that isn't stupid. But I also get the impression that they've been there for a while because there's that phrase that's floating around at the start of the game, "Follow the Freedom Trail," that you can hear from rando NPCs and from Dr. Amari in the main story. There are a whole 6 quests in the railroad path. The first I've already covered in the previous video. It exists as part of the main quest, Road to Freedom, where you find the railroad. Following that is Tradecraft, which is largely a massive waste of time. After some pointless fucking around, you go to their former HQ to retrieve a pointless item that does absolutely nothing, and is just an entirely pointless quest objective. After that is Underground Undercover, which is basically setting up for a synth revolt from within the Institute for when you attack it later. The rest of it just has you following half of the Institute path, your character basically deceiving the Institute. It's worth noting that a synth revolt is the most pointless thing ever, because they have shutdown codes and the Institute has an intercom system that can transmit to the entire facility. Next is Precipice of War. The Brotherhood of Steel randomly decides for some reason that they've got to brutally wipe out the railroad and launches an assault upon them. I get the Brotherhood hates the synths, but the entire endeavor to wipe out the railroad seems like a pointless distraction for the Brotherhood, and a pointless conflict to throw at the player. I can't complain about this too much though, but that's just because I hate the railroad and them being wiped out is a good thing. Next is Rocket's Red Glare. You steal a vertebrate from the Brotherhood, run around their airship and plant some bombs, then fly off and watch the fireworks. And once again, I'm going to be saving the final quest for the end. Now we get to the railroad side quests. Many of them are Radiant quests themselves, but do have an ending to them. First up is Boston After Dark, in which you escort a synth to a safe house. There's not much more to it. After that is Mercer's Safe House, where you're sent to claim a random settlement for the railroad as a new safe house. If you're siding with the railroad to build the teleporter, this is a mandatory quest as this is where you'll be building it. Following that is Burning Cover, which is less of a quest and more of a jumping point if your cover inside the Institute is blown for whatever reason. They just send you to the Minutemen to continue the main story with them. Next is Butcher's Bill. Go check on a safe house to find it overrun with raiders and deal with a Deathclaw. There's a part 2 to this quest as well, where you have to find a member of the railroad in a random location. He's dead. Quest over. After that is Memory Interrupted, where the synth you helped earlier has since had his memories altered and needs to be escorted out of the Commonwealth. You have to clear a location of old synths and another character is accidentally sent there as well? If she isn't dead yet in the main story, that is. Just goes to show how organized the railroad is. Following that is Operation Ticonderoga. The safe house you escorted the synth to earlier has been wiped out by the Institute agents. Kill 2 coursers and report back. Next is To the Mattresses, in which you're tasked with killing raiders in random locations. Literally, that's all there is to it. There's a gang that the railroad hates, that specifically hates synths, and is cruel to them for some reason, so they send you to kill their leadership in 6 different quests. Each one literally just shoves 1 extra NPC into a random established raider base. Finally is Randolph's Safe House. Similar to the previous one, it's numbered. Literally all you do is clear out random areas of hostile creatures. That's it. The railroad has separate Infinite Radiant quests too. Again, we'll be talking about this another time. One last note for this faction. Fuck the railroad. Finally, we reached the Brotherhood of Steel, so I can't prolong this any longer. Oh boy, this is going to be rough. Alright, so one criticism at this point that I might receive is that I'm blinded by nostalgia or something along those lines. It's one I've heard and seen countless times before in discussions with people, When I say Fallout 2 is better than Fallout 4, that's not actually nostalgia talking, since I never played Fallout 2 when it first came out. In fact, my very first Fallout game was Fallout 3. Then I played New Vegas, then 4, then Fallout 1 in 2017, and finally Fallout 2 at the beginning of 2018. The handling of the Brotherhood in each game is, well, varied, I guess? The general consensus I've seen is they're xenophobic technophiles. They don't trust the world's technology to the average person because that's essentially what led to the world's nuclear destruction in the first place. And they simply don't trust outsiders. This is seen in Fallout 1, when you're sent on a literal suicide mission they don't expect you to return from. In Fallout 2, the Brotherhood as a whole is extremely scarce. They've got 3 small bunkers, 2 of which are basically empty, and 3 characters, 2 of which have little interaction. The third gives a quest, then is killed by the Enclave. Then we have Fallout 3, and probably the largest reason I don't really know as much about the Brotherhood as I should. In Fallout 3, you're forced to side with the Brotherhood no matter what. In addition to this, they're presented as generic good guy factions, saviors of the people, and so forth. I found them painfully uninteresting. It was only after the fact that I had learned that Bethesda had fucked with the lore to force some sort of weird offshoot of the Brotherhood to the East Coast. I haven't looked too deeply into the lore on the Brotherhood, but I trust what Mr. Caption said in one of his Fallout 3 videos. Link in the description. The short version of it, as I understand it, is this. The Brotherhood was in a war with the NCR, a war they were losing despite having superior technology due to the sheer numbers of the NCR. So during this time, they sent out a detachment to the East Coast to scout or explore for potential technology they didn't even know existed. And not only that, but sent them out to face unknown threats of the wasteland with inferior equipment. On top of all that, they sent the descendant of Roger Maxon, the founder of the Brotherhood. Also during that time, instead of still being xenophobes, they seemingly decided that helping all the random wastelanders and getting their own troops killed was somehow more important, or something? And now Bethesda has asked pulled a contrived reason to shove the Brotherhood into their new game, Fallout 76. Rather than being an isolationist group, they found a satellite that let them contact all corners of the USA, and I guess established Brotherhood chapters elsewhere in the country. This was absolutely done in response to the backlash from the fans over them fucking with the lore by having the Brotherhood in West Virginia 25 years after the war. So their response is to fuck with the lore even more. Worse yet is the fact this will protect them going forward too. Now they can have the Brotherhood chapter in every part of the country they want. So if there's a Fallout game that takes place in Texas, the Brotherhood could be there. Alaska? The Brotherhood could be there. Hell, maybe there could be Brotherhood chapters in other countries too. Particularly Canada and Mexico. Bad news for anyone tired of the Brotherhood of Steel. They've been in every single game to date, and they'll probably be in every single game going forward too. That's not to say the Brotherhood itself is bad, but when exploring what's happening in a new part of the country, it would be nice to see something new and different. It would be nice to see new and different factions at play that we've never seen before. Imagine what Fallout 3 would be if the Brotherhood, the Enclave, and the Super Mutants weren't in it, but entirely new factions. As for their main quests, we'll start off with Reveille? Something? You get this after killing Kellogg, regardless of whether you've met Paladin Danse and done his quests or not. This sends you to the airport where the Brotherhood set up their base of operations. If you have done Dance's quests, you'll be invited aboard. If you haven't, you'll be sent to the police station to meet him. Either way, your first encounter with Danse starts with fire support. As you approach the police station, they're under siege by ghouls and you help Danse kill them. Following that is Call to Arms, where you travel with Danse to a nearby location to retrieve an item. You get attacked by synths. After that is Semper Invicta, where you go do a radiant quest for each of Dance's buddies. One has you collect a random item from a random location, the other has you kill enemies on a random location. The Brotherhood haven't arrived in their Zeppelin yet. This is where the questline pauses until they do show up. Next is Shadow of Steel. You go to the Zeppelin, talk to a guy, and talk to another guy. This leads into Tour Duty, where you talk to a few more cardboard cutouts called characters. Following that is Show No Mercy. Go to a nearby fort to kill all the super mutants there, so the Brotherhood can take the mini-nukes there to use in their war on the Institute. If you haven't progressed the main story anymore at this point, the Brotherhood will just tell you to do what you can to find a way into the Institute, which is obviously building the teleporter. Once you do learn of a way in, you get the next quest, From Within. You're sent to convince Dr. Lee to return to the Brotherhood. She has you go to the FEV lab to find evidence about what happened to Virgil, and get a personal log of his to show her, and that's enough to convince her to leave the Institute. You can tell her you've met him, but she doesn't believe you. Also, one of the game's few speech checks is here, so that's cool, I guess. After that is Outside the Wire. This is a parallel to the Minutemen's Inside Job quest, where you just download shit from an Institute computer and return the info to the Brotherhood. I didn't comment on this earlier, but it's really amazing that not only can this holotape contain all of the Institute's data, but they just have it so easily fucking accessible. Next is Liberty Reprimed. You're sent to retrieve an item and build 4 items in the Settlement Workshop for Liberty Prime. Then you're sent to locate bombs for Liberty Prime to use in battle. This sends you to Shadow Moses Island, a military base in the Glowing Sea. It's been infested with the children of Adam, who were in turn killed by ghouls. Apparently they tried to launch a nuke, which just goes to show how fucking insane these obnoxious cunts are. One of them is still alive and tries to talk to you, but you're better off just blowing them away immediately. There's also a holotape from the single most bored-sounding character in the entire game. Some pre-war worker in the facility realizing the bombs dropping were real. Paladin Dan says he'll stay behind with the bombs. After that is Blind Betrayal. You're accused of knowing Paladin Dance is a synth and not reporting it. You're then sent to kill him. You can either kill him or spare him. If you spare him, when you leave you'll find Maxon outside waiting for you and demand to kill Dance again. You can kill him, let Maxon kill him, or convince Maxon to let him live. After pretending that didn't happen, you're sent to wipe out the railroad, and let me just say how fucking cathartic this is, after having to deal with this insanely annoying group of obnoxious cunts. Yes, I'm absolutely lingering on this moment because fuck the railroad. Following that is Spoils of War. This is the Brotherhood side of Mass Fusion. Enter a building, grab the item, and deal with enemy forces. It progresses in exactly the same way. Next is Ad Victoriam. Basically you turn on Liberty Prime, and follow him on his path of destruction until you reach the Institute, and blow a hole in their ceiling to enter from. There's that final quest we're going to save for later once again, but we're really close to it now. I just need to talk about the Brotherhood side quests, and they don't have many. First up is a loose end. The Brotherhood decides that Virgil needs to die because he's a super mutant. You could kill him, you could spare him, or you could cure him and inform them of the fact. Next is Duty or Dishonor. Supplies are going missing, and strangely enough, it isn't weapons or armor, but food. After doing some questioning, you follow a guy to an underground area of the airport. Turns out he felt bad about watching the Brotherhood kill all the ghouls at the airport, and now he's, feeding the remaining ones in the underground? Fucking what? I think this quest is trying to set up that ghouls could be domesticated or something? That they're just violent because they're hungry, or something? Which is fucking stupid. Finally is The Lost Patrol, which is a series of finding beacons and holotapes that lead you to an old bunker with a lone Brotherhood member. He's kinda fucked up, but you can convince him to rejoin the Brotherhood. Naturally, the Brotherhood has Radiant quests as well. You all know what I'm going to say. But, more importantly, we're finally done with this entire section, which means it's now time for the grand finale. As we've already seen, the Brotherhood march upon CIT with Liberty Prime. They blow a hole in the ground and enter through it. The Minutemen have you enter solo through a sewer system and teleport them in once you're through. The railroad has you working undercover, and as such, they just have you teleport them in when it's time to strike. And that's where the differences end. From there, you and your faction-chosen team invade and kill off most of the Institute's fighting forces. At this point, what would be the most logical course of action? The Institute, despite the horrible things they've done, could be of great benefit to each of the factions. The Brotherhood are technophiles who basically worship technology as a religion. Surely there's some seriously advanced tech within the Institute they can use or learn from, even if they do hate the synths. Sure, they view the synths as abominations, but the Institute has made scientific advances that aren't related to synths, right? In fact, you could argue the case that any advancements in the fields of weapons development, medicine, and growing crops would be useful to all the factions. What about the railroad? They'd have access to all the resources necessary to assist in freeing all the synths they want, maybe even take out opposing groups such as the Raiders of the S&M gang or whatever the fuck they were called. On top of that, the synths are basically an entirely new race now, right? As in, the Institute's facilities are the only method the entire species has to reproduce. So by destroying the Institute, you eliminate any future the species has and condemns them to go extinct after all existing ones die. And how about the Minutemen? Surely they would see how incredibly useful the Institute could be to them to take over. Sure, and synth production oats to current leadership, but then you have the single safest place in the wasteland, unlimited power from their nuclear reactor, and decades upon decades of existing research to use to their advantage. Each of these factions would have a very good reason to end the Institute and their practices, but take over their facility. So the natural course of action is to just fucking nuke the place. Yep, that's right. After securing most of the facility, you're sent up to Sean's room to release a lock on the door to their reactor, put a thing on said reactor, and teleport to a rooftop to go watch it blow up. As for the Institute, they can't really blow themselves up now, can they? No, instead Sean just tells you again that he's dying, then he dies. The fucking end. I gotta take a minute here to talk about the voice acting in this game. Just listen to Sean here.
Oh, don't pretend to care now. You had your chance to help me, and cast me aside instead.
I'm sorry it's come to this, Sean.
You're sorry? You can't be that sorry if you're here going through with it.
There's no going back, Sean. The Institute has to be stopped.
And you've decided this for yourself? Or has it been fed to you by the corrupt societies above ground?
I'm here to blow up your reactor, Sean. Put an end to the Institute.
Well, at least there's no need for guessing games now. It's not enough that I lay here dying. Now you plan on what? Destroying everything? Tell me then. Under what righteous pretense have you justified this atrocity?
I just want to watch this place burn.
It's hard to believe I'm related to you.
He says his life work is being destroyed, but he sounds mildly annoyed. I've seen people get more pissed for being cut off on the road, never mind his life's work being destroyed and being moments away from being killed in a nuclear blast caused by his own parent. But this isn't just Sean, it isn't even just Fallout 4. I'd say most of the work in Bethesda games, starting with Oblivion, has just kind of been passable? I mean, if I had to describe it in a single word, I'd say it sounds standardized. If voice acting is something that could be manufactured in a factory, most of the voice work on Bethesda games is what it would sound like. I mean, it's not bad or awful, it's all just so bland and boring though. Sure, there are a few standout examples, but if it isn't characters sounding completely crazy, they mostly just sound bored. Either that or bored mixed with some other emotion like Sean here. If you're going to go through the effort of having every line of dialogue in a game voiced, then I don't think standard or bland or boring are really the descriptors you want for it. Now, don't get me wrong, the voice work isn't bad for the most part, but that's just it. It's not bad, it's not great, it's just there, I guess. It's what I'd expect the bare minimum to be without being bad, and that's not a good thing. I'm not saying characters have to be over the top, dramatic, and crazy, but voice acting is important, especially for what's supposed to be a major character. How a character speaks can not only inform us a lot about who they are, but it could tell us about how they feel on certain subjects. You could tell me a character is a hard-ass army general, but if he sounds like the squeaky-voiced teen from The Simpsons and is all nervous, I'm not gonna buy it. Likewise, if you present me a character that has bland voice acting, you don't get to learn much about that character. They're little more than a cardboard cutout. Sean himself barely has any real interaction or emotion. He sends you to do jobs for him, then he dies, or you nuke his home, and the most extreme his voice acting gets is mildly annoyed. For a dual comparison of voice acting as well as the final confrontation of a game, let's look at the Master from Fallout 1. First off, you have numerous ways of resolving the conflict. You can fight the Master directly, you can sneak into the base and set a timer on a nuke to kill him, or you can convince him that what he's doing is wrong, and that leads to one of the best interactions in the entire series, and the most satisfying ending to Fallout 1. Just take in this entire scene. It has more character and personality than all of Fallout 4 combined.
Oh, bother.
So what shall it be? Do you join the Unity, or do you die here?
Join.
Die!
Join.
Die! I don't have to prove anything to you!
Prove.
Very demanding for one in your
tenuous
position. But I can
respect
your needs. The
Unity
will bring about the master race.
Master.
One able to survive, or even
Thrive
in the wasteland. As long as there are differences, we will
tear ourselves apart,
fighting each other. We need one race.
Race.
One goal.
Goal.
One people to move forward to our destiny. Of course.
Mutants are best equipped to deal with the world today.
Who else?
The ghouls?
Please.
Normals.
They brought nuclear death to us all. This will be the age of mutants. All that
resist.
Yes. And all those that are required for the
Unity
as well. The remainder will be allowed to live out their days, but under
Unity
control
and protection.
But none shall breed, for they will be the last of their race.
And what is that? Preposterous!
The FEV2 virus doesn't destroy the reproductive organs of those it mutates. Do you have
proof?
I must
digest this information. One moment.
I understand now. You made a clever forgery. You made this up to fool me.
Fool! Me!
But it cannot be. This would mean that
all my work
has been for
nothing.
Everything that I've tried to
a failure!
It can't
be.
I don't think that I can
Continue.
to have done the things I have done in the name of progress and healing. It was madness. I can see that now. Madness. There is no hope. Leave now. Leave while you still have
hope.
It starts off with the Master shouting,
I don't have to prove anything to you!
From the delivery, we could tell he's arrogant. He doesn't like being questioned by those he considers lesser than him. He's asserting dominance. Next, you say, you can't know he represents the best future unless he proves it, to which he responds,
very demanding for one in your
tenuous
position. But I can
respect
your needs.
He still doesn't think much of you. Here you are, standing before him, this greater being at the heart of his empire, making demands of him, simply asking questions. but he can understand the perspective that someone may need some convincing. Then we get to the heart of the Master's character. He believes super mutants are the next step in human evolution, that he can attain world peace with his master race. As he says, able to survive or even thrive in the world ruined and destroyed by the humans. He believes by unifying all humans as super mutants, one single race, that he'd be eliminating the differences that cause conflict. He believes so strongly in this that he actually calls it destiny, with real heart and conviction behind it.
To move forward to our destiny.
He goes so far as to say that the humans that don't get converted will be allowed to live, but not to breed, outright saying this to end the race of mankind. Then you reveal to him that the mutants are sterile. His response is more arrogance and unshakable confidence.
Preposterous! The FEV2 virus doesn't destroy the reproductive organs of those it mutates.
He knows what he's doing. He knows he's working towards a better, brighter future, and he believes himself infallible. All you're trying to do is get in the way of his plans. Then you give him the proof. His voice goes quiet.
I understand now.
His breathing grows a bit shaky.
You made a clever forgery.
He's trying to keep composure as he's trying to process the evidence. He tries to rationalize it away by calling it a forgery. His breath's still shaky. He's getting angry.
You made this up to fool me. Fool
me!
How dare this lesser being try to trick him? There's a bare, slightly noticeable stutter.
But it cannot be.
His vision of his perfect future is collapsing. The female voice that cuts in saying,
"Oh, my work,"
sounds on the brink of tears. Exactly as he says, everything he's done has been for nothing. His master race wouldn't live beyond its current generation, and had he exterminated the humans as he said he was planning, that would have been the end of intelligent life on Earth. Assuming he planned to take over the entire planet, that is. Finally, we reach the pinnacle of this interaction.
I don't think that I can
continue.
Continue?
To have done the things I have done in the name of progress and healing. It was madness.
His deeds weigh heavily upon him. He realizes he was blinded by his own ego and arrogance, blinded by his own vision of his perfect world that he didn't see the fatal flaw in it, and as a result, he's ruined countless lives and ended others, performed horrible experimentations upon innocent people. He is overridden with guilt, stating outright that there is no hope.
There is no hope.
Meaning for himself, for his plans, for his super mutants. In his eyes, he can't redeem himself. He can't undo the damage he's done. He then urges you to leave.
While you still have
hope.
This entire interaction tells us everything we need to know about the Master, and it's the only time we interact with him in the entire game. Due to the masterful writing and performance, no pun intended, this ironically elevates the Master to be one of the most human characters in the entire series as a whole. Every word he speaks has real emotion in it, from sadness to arrogance to anger to self-righteousness. Not once during this conversation does he sound like he's bored in a recording booth, reading off lines to get a paycheck. I don't even have to use Fallout or Bethesda games as an example of this, either. Take this clip from Oddworld, for example.
It ain't my fault! It's that Abe guy! First rupture thumbs, now necromines! There ain't no bones anywhere! No bones, no brew! I am totally screwed! My career is over! And it's all that blue bastard's fault!
In less than 30 seconds, we could see panic, fear, sadness, and anger all well expressed. If this were in a Bethesda game, these lines would be flatly presented with a bare tinge of actual emotion. Now, not everything has to be that over the top, but it's an example of some real effort being put in. Or, how about what I'd consider one of the single greatest pieces of voice work in any game ever? Mary from Silent Hill 2.
Mary?
What do you want, James?
I brought you some flowers.
Flowers? I don't
want any damn flowers. Just go home already.
Mary, what are you saying?
Look! I'm disgusting. I don't deserve flowers. Between the disease and the drugs, I look like a monster. Well, what are you looking at? Get the hell out of here! Leave me alone already! I'm no use to anyone. I'll be dead soon anyway. Maybe today, maybe tomorrow. It'd be easier if they'd just kill me. But I guess the hospital is making a nice profit off me. They want to keep me alive. Are you still here? I told you to go! Are you deaf? Don't come back! James! Wait! Please don't go! Stay with me! Don't leave me alone! I didn't mean what I said! Please, James! Tell me I'll be okay! Tell me I'm not going to die! Help me! Well, this letter's gone on too long, so I'll say goodbye. I told the nurse to give this to you after I'm gone. That means that as you read this, I'm already dead. I can't tell you to remember me, but I can't bear for you to forget me. These last few years since I became ill, I am so sorry for what I did to you, did to us. You've given me so much, and I haven't been able to return a single thing. That's why I want you to live for yourself now. Do what's best for you, James. James, you made me happy.
The entire game has unusual and awkward voice acting, intentionally so. And then the ending of the game gives you a gut punch with Mary, both in the lead up to the final boss, and as well as her letter at the end. Again, it isn't someone bored and reading from a script. It's someone presenting some real, heartfelt emotion. It's actually tragic to listen to. Even while writing and editing this, I had listened to these clips again, and they legitimately brought a tear to my eye. That is the strength of proper voice acting. They can make you feel. All of Bethesda's voice acting makes me feel as boredom and rage. I did want to save the topic of voice acting for later in this analysis series, but this felt like the best time to talk about it in regards to what Sean says at the end. I do also want to make clear that there is some good voice acting in these games. I'm not writing it all off as bland. Even with Sean, you can hear some venom in his voice. Once again, there's no way to come to any kind of peaceful resolution. You talk to Sean and he just says you're ruining everything, but there's no other path if you side with him either. As a result, all 4 of these paths result in incredibly unsatisfying endings. With the Institute, Sean is only ever a quest giver, then he dies, and you're left with a set piece, some figurative robots, and some actual robots. With the other 3 factions, you kill your own son, blow up his home and all his friends and creations. All the while your character doesn't seem to care, and you get a boring congratulations from the leader of the faction you sided with. Oh yeah, you also get a prop for your settlement. After apparently believing that synths don't have a free will or whatever, and after hating you for destroying everything he's done, Sean gives you a mini fake Sean to stick in one of your settlements and immediately become irrelevant. He just got out of his deathbed to reprogram this child synth before you nuked him to ash. This becomes infinitely more stupid if you decide to kill everyone in the Institute on your first time through. See, if Sean is dead and so is everyone else, there isn't really anyone to reprogram synth Sean, yet he still shows up when you're about to leave the Institute. He even gives you the same holotape from the real Sean, who should have been long dead. Then the cherry on this shit sundae is the end slideshow. There isn't one. Instead, it's a cinematic that all 4 factions share the same cutscene. The Institute's version has a different opening, otherwise the actual meat of the end cinematic is all the same.
I can feel it wash over me. The heat, the force, the radiation, the fear. I've lost the end of the world all over again. I close my eyes. I see my life before all of this. Before the bombs. Everything can change in an instant, and the future you plan for yourself shifts, whether or not you're ready. At some point, it happens to all of us. This was not the world I wanted, but it was the one I found myself in. The Commonwealth. My home. Ripped apart and put back together. I hoped I could find my family. Cheat time, make us whole again, the way we were. But now I know. I know I can't go back. I know the world has changed. The road ahead will be hard. This time I'm ready. Because I know war. War never changes.
This takes what few choices you could have made and renders them absolutely null and void. Instead of the typical slideshow which details what effects our actions and choices have upon the world and characters we've encountered, we get a bland, boring cutscene that's just like the rest of the game. Pointless, meaningless, and lacking substance. And just like that, the game is over. Or should I say, the main story is over. After all the build-up, it kinda just suddenly ends and you're left thinking, is that it? Yeah, that's it. For anyone watching this who hasn't played the game, it may seem like there's more to these quests since I talked about each faction before getting to the end. But trust me, if you were to play it, it just kinda comes to a sudden halt. It also seems like the writers were extremely averse to the possibility of the player choosing a bad guy faction. So much so that they made post-game prophecies for Mama Murphy, in which they portray the Institute as being misunderstood, yet having good intentions. Let me just quickly remind everyone that the Institute is directly responsible for the deaths of countless people, kidnappings, rampant paranoia in the Commonwealth, and super mutants. This unrealistically positive bullshit is completely fucking stupid. Now that we finally finished the story, we could talk about why it doesn't work in some more detail. I'm going to use Nick Valentine for this because he's basically a microcosm of the story as a whole. As explained in the last video, the first time we hear about Nick is when we're told to hire him to help find our lost son. There are numerous ways of finding this out. However, everyone who talks about him are intentionally vague. You might not notice this on your first time through, but it becomes apparent once you know everything. I've already pointed out the example in the last video where his secretary sends you to go find him. It gives a helpful description of, he wears a hat and trench coat getup. The most glaring issue obviously being the fact that you're given a description of someone to go find, but aren't given the most important piece of information that would be relevant to identifying him, the fact he's a synth. This is absolutely not unique to his secretary. Every character I've talked to in Diamond City absolutely will not talk about the fact he's a synth under any circumstances. And no, this isn't just because they view him as an equal or anything like that. One of the characters says people in town are afraid he'll draw the Institute's attention. From that line alone, the logical assumption is the fact he's a detective that locates missing people might give the Institute cause for concern that he might end up tracking them down one day. This line has a different meaning when we know he's in fact a synth. He might attract their attention because they want their property back, or because they might want to destroy him so he doesn't fall into the hands of their enemies. The main point is, characters are intentionally vague to a comical degree to keep you from learning he's a synth, to the point a character taunts him about being hungry immediately before you meet him. And the room he's in is cast in shadow so you can't see he's not human. The main story does this with Sean being a 60-year-old man and leader of the Institute. I know the entire point of a twist is to surprise the audience, but it has to be handled well for it to actually work and mean anything. It has to be earned. I wasn't surprised at all in the reveal that Sean was father. In fact, I had called that in advance, simply because of how fucking obvious it is. I knew the fact Bethesda wouldn't do anything interesting with the concept. But it's such a lame twist that it destroyed any interest I ever had in playing Fallout 4 again, to the point I dropped the game there and didn't pick it up again until I decided to do this analysis series. A well-handled plot twist can elevate a story, while a bad twist can ruin it, and that's some of what we see here in Fallout 4. It still has a plethora of issues outside of bad twists, but for now I'm just talking about plot twists. Fallout 4 goes so far out of its way to preserve its twists that not only are characters being completely vague and stupid for no reason, but the world itself is devoid of any evidence or reference to certain things where there should be, and this only serves to make the world feel more artificial. When the entire point of a massive world with deep lore like this is to immerse you in that world, to present it as its own world, and that's really the key thing here. We all know the fiction we consume is not real. When watching Game of Thrones, for example, we know that Westeros and White Walkers are not real. But it's made to show us this world where, for the characters within that world, it's real to them. Their struggles, fears, goals, pains, hopes and dreams, their problems, are stuff these characters have to deal with. The time is taken to add details to strengthen our perception that the world we're seeing, despite having dragons and magic, still follows basic logical consistency. Characters act and react to events. The way Fallout 4 works, it's as if the whole world is trying to hide the twist from you when it could have easily been written in ways to still have the same twist, dumb as it is, that aren't completely stupid and only make things worse. See the example I gave in the last video about Kellogg being a synth copy of the real Kellogg who kidnapped Sean. There's more to it than that. We're given this bullshit sequence where you prance through his memories that ultimately adds nothing to the game or series as a whole. It's a stupid, pointless, insipid, and hollow set piece with no meaning that someone at Bethesda thought was super duper cool. Spectacle over substance. The rule of cool. Show the player these cool looking but hollow set pieces that lack any substance, and that's apparently good enough. This entire sequence is directly responsible for some plot holes and contrivances, but we don't gain any real info that could have been uniquely presented in this manner. We learn the rushed and pointless backstory of generic villain man who is dead and irrelevant at this point. We learn the Institute uses teleportation, and we learn the location of our next lead. That's what I mean when I say everything about Nick Valentine is a microcosm of Fallout 4 as a whole, because this applies to him equally as a character. He's visually unique and distinct, but all they did with him as far as personality goes is good guy detective man with hardly any depth. More on that later. And since we're on the topic of twists, let's talk about a couple of good ones for the sake of comparison. Now, basically everyone watching this will likely know these twists since they're both kind of famous, but I'm going to explain anyways. The Sixth Sense is a movie starring Bruce Willis at the peak of his career before he started accepting bottom-of-the-barrel trash movies and became dead inside. The movie is about a child psychologist and a kid who can see the dead. It starts off with Bruce Willis's house being invaded by a former patient of his that lost his shit and blamed Bruce for his troubles. This ends in Bruce Willis getting shot. A year later, obviously after Bruce has recovered from getting shot, he's onto a new case. A child that seems to be similarly disturbed as the former patient who shot Bruce, then killed himself. Through the movie, Bruce Willis comes to believe the kid about his ability, and in turn they prevent a murder due to evidence given to the kid by a dead kid. I'm really not doing the story any justice here. Finally, we reach the end of the movie and the twist is revealed. Bruce Willis was dead the entire time. The gunshot from the start of the movie was fatal. Well, M. Night Shyamalan's reputation has since been thrown into a dumpster because of the multitude of shitty movies he's done. The twist in this one is at least handled extremely well. Through the movie, we don't see anyone speak directly to Bruce, except the kid, but nothing really feels out of place, because characters are reacting to other things happening in the world that we mistake for them reacting to Bruce based on the knowledge we have. His wife grabbing the bill at the restaurant? That's not out of her annoyance with Bruce showing up late because he's spending all his time on this case. It's her frustration at someone else standing her up. Everything that happens leading up to the reveal makes sense both before and after the reveal, even though the reveal recontextualizes the events we see. The story hides its twist from the audience in a way that makes sense in the context of the world we're shown. We're told ghosts sometimes see what they want to, which explains why the revelation that Bruce Willis is dead the whole time is a surprise to him as well. But it doesn't go so far as to change earlier scenes to be different, as that would have invalidated the twist because you're not giving the audience the proper info at that point, even if it still conforms to the rules that ghosts sometimes see what they want to see. The next example of a twist that's done well is BioShock. For anyone who hasn't played this game, you're a passenger on a plane that crashes in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, coincidentally, next to a lighthouse that's seemingly in the middle of nowhere, and you are the sole survivor. You enter the lighthouse and take a small sub down to the underwater city, as you've got nowhere else to go. It's on autopilot and brings you into the city. You quickly learn things aren't as they should be and the city has fallen into chaos. Through a walkie-talkie, you communicate with a man named Atlas, who wants to escape the hellhole Rapture has become, and he sees you as his only chance to make it out, as he can't save his family on his own. He kindly gives instructions to the player, and essentially sets the goals you follow to progress through the game. The deeper we go, the more we learn about Rapture's denizens before the fall, including its founder, Andrew Ryan, as well as a man called Fontaine. It quickly becomes apparent that Ryan is the villain, as he takes steps to hinder you, and he eventually kills Atlas's family. Then you get down to the end of the game, and the final confrontation with Ryan. Then this happens.
The assassin has overcome my final defense, and now he's come to murder me. In the end, what separates a man from a slave? Money? Power? No. A man chooses. A slave obeys. You think you have memories. A farm. A family. An airplane. A crash. And then this place. Was there really a family? Did that airplane crash? Or was it hijacked? Forced down. Forced down by something less than a man, something bred to sleepwalk through life until they are activated by a simple phrase spoken by their kindly master. Was a man sent to kill, or a slave? A man chooses. A slave obeys. Come in. Stop, would you kindly? Would you kindly? Powerful phrase. Familiar phrase.
Would you kindly? Would you kindly get this? Would you kindly find that? Would you kindly find that? Would you kindly find? Would you kindly get this? Would you kindly head to Ryan's office and kill the son of a bitch?
Sit, would you kindly? Stand, would you kindly? Run! Stop! Turn. A man chooses. A slave obeys. Kill! A man chooses.
a slave obeys. Obey!
The rug is pulled out from under you, and what you thought you knew turns out to be a lie. You are being controlled by Fontaine the entire time. You are being controlled by Fontaine the entire time. There is no Atlas, and this actually isn't the end of the game. There's more to do. Now you've got to stop Fontaine. Atlas saying, "Would you kindly," was a trigger in your character's mind control, in which your character does what he's told. It's such an innocent phrase that it doesn't stand out as being weird. It's just a phrase that's easily passed off as just how the person talks. It gets to the point that you don't even notice it. It's just part of the character at that point, even if you know the twist. I've played through this game a good 8 or 9 times, thanks to the glitch on Xbox 360 that prevented me from getting the achievement for completing the game without dying on the hardest difficulty. And even then you get so used to the phrase, "Would you kindly," that you don't even notice it most times if you're not paying absolute attention to what is said. I use these examples because they're both what I'd consider to be good twists. The Sixth Sense, rather than just being a movie about a psychologist helping a kid that can genuinely see ghosts and has a happy ending, is instead memorable for its revelation and bittersweet ending. BioShock, on the other hand, builds up this world and uses its linear gameplay as an advantage, giving you a literal voice of guidance that turns out to be someone manipulating you the entire time for the sake of his own personal gain. But the most important part is the story still makes sense before and after their twist. As I've explained, neither of Fallout 4's twists make any sense once they're revealed. There's absolutely zero reason to taunt a robot about hunger. There's absolutely zero reason for people to avoid saying he's a synth, when people talk about being scared of synths in the Institute all the time anyways. The Institute is aware that people on the surface know what synths are, and they're not going to kidnap and replace someone just because they utter the word synth. Likewise, there's no reason for any evidence of Sean being an old man to be obscured, even if you could argue the fact that Keller calls 2 different people by the same name, which is fucking stupid by the way. Calling both the leader of the Institute 60 years ago and Sean the old man, everything else still doesn't make sense. Take the fact he wanted to meet his surviving parent before he died. Instead of carefully transporting them to the Institute, he simply releases them into the Commonwealth, which he himself believes is a worthless wasteland. Expects that parent to survive the harshness of the world, dealing with countless threats threats like super mutant, raiders, mutated insect, mutated animal, starvation, cannibal, dehydration, ghoul, robot, old world traps, radiation, synths, paranoid people, gunner, dipshit cultists, getting trapped in an infinite loop of helping settlements for Preston Guard, dying of boredom. You get the point. On top of that, he's making things directly harder on his parent by having them kill Kellogg and his small army of synths. He's pitting his only surviving parent against deadly killing machines. He sets up his parent to deal with all the harshest threats in the world just to see if they'd make it. Which, by the way, in the case of the player choosing a female character, then it can reasonably be assumed she'd be less likely to survive these threats, as the male playable character at least has military experience. To add to this, Sean is dying of cancer. An exact timeline can't be established due to the nature of the game being open world and you can tackle a story at whatever speed you like. But this results in him putting his plan into action weeks or even days before he dies. He may not know how long he has left, which means he more or less waited until the last minute to release his parent, even though he could have done this at any point since becoming an unquestioned leader of the Institute. Regardless, he's throwing a pre-war citizen into the post-apocalypse with no knowledge of how the world works, and just hopes they not only survive, but also solve one of the greatest mysteries of the Commonwealth. Once again, Corsos are presented as a super soldier that can solo take out dozens of gunners who are essentially trained soldiers themselves, and you're supposed to just take one out on your own to enter the Institute. But worse than that is the fact that he risks your character's perspective of the Institute being ruined for no reason. No one on the surface will ever have anything good to say about the Institute. Look at the havoc, chaos, and paranoia they directly cause. So if Nate or Nora see all of the evil from the Institute, much of which they have to directly encounter in order to reach the Institute and get an extremely negative impression of the Institute, to go so far as to not side with them, then many of the Institute's secrets are essentially public knowledge due to Nate or Nora seeing them firsthand. They're under the rune to CIT, they use teleportation, they absolutely replace people with synths, they're responsible for the super mutants, and so forth. And in an absolute worst case scenario, such a security breach could possibly end up with the Institute being outright destroyed. Sean isn't just risking the life of his surviving parent, he's not just risking his lifetime of work, but he's risking the lives and lifetimes of work of the countless people that brought the Institute to where it is today. But it gets even worse, because as I mentioned earlier, members of the Institute mention numerous times that they don't trust you due to your contact with the Railroad, which further begs the question of why Sean would ever risk his surviving parent meeting them. Hell, even in the lead up to meeting Sean, he recognizes all the bad you must have heard about the Institute. Motherfucker, what the fuck did you expect? The Institute kidnapped your goddamn kid. Of course the player's character is going to hate the Institute. Beyond that, this twist adds nothing of value to not only the game as a whole, but even Fallout itself. It's a twist purely for the sake of shock value, except they did the most boring and obvious thing with it. Like I said about the set pieces, it's about style and spectacle over substance. The Institute itself is a set piece. We're told they have to budget resources to save power because it's such an issue, but we see they're wasting power everywhere for no reason. Part of the railroad path has you kill some guards in a section of the Institute that's under construction, a section that is never completed or even advanced if you take the Institute path. It's never even mentioned. Never mind the fact they have two entire wings that could be repurposed. The robotics department, which you trudge through when invading the Institute with the other factions, and the super mutant department. Again, hollow, empty set pieces. Again, style over substance. And this becomes a running theme with the game as a whole. And hell, I'm not even going to say that in itself is a bad thing if done in the right setting. There's nothing wrong with games or other entertainment media that's style over substance. The problem is when it's done with something that was all about its substance. When I sit down to watch an episode of Star Trek, for example, well, my expectations can be varied. They did have some weird episodes after all. Likewise, when I play Fallout or Elder Scrolls, I expect to be immersed in an interesting world with good stories, characterization, and world building. I honestly can't think of anything worthwhile if Fallout 4 adds to the lore or history of Fallout as a whole. The Minutemen? The Railroad? The Institute? Synths? What do any of these things really add to the lore? Especially considering how little sense it all makes. Fallout 1 establishes the super mutants as a force in the world, gives them a reason for existing the way they do, gives a method of creation, the FEV, and even provides a backstory for the FEV itself. Fallout 4 gives us the Minutemen, who are entirely lacking any substance as a group. They help people. Hell, Bethesda even gives a bit of backstory with the Minutemen being destroyed in Quincy, but you can't do anything with it. It's still fucking hollow and pointless. The Minutemen have no goals or purpose. Fallout 4 gives us the Railroad, a group of obnoxious fanatics who actually manage to get some power and resource in a world where both are hard to obtain, and instead of trying to help their fellow man, they spend over a decade helping fake people. They have no motivation, except the bizarre belief they've got to dedicate their entire lives to helping these fake people. They care far more about the lives of synths than their fellow man, which wouldn't be so bad if they had more characterization instead of just caring about synths and synths only. See, it would go a long way of getting the player invested in this faction if any of these characters felt like real people. Maybe they're leading double lives in their pursuit of the Institute. Take Desdemona for example. What can you say about her? She's strong-willed and wants to help synths. Got it. What else can you tell me about her character? Nothing, because she doesn't have anything besides the bare minimum needed for her to dispense quests to you. If she had a family she was keen on protecting, it would add some conflict to both your character and hers. She would have to balance her life fighting the Institute and taking care of her family. Then, when it comes time to wiping out the Railroad on the Institute path, you'd be saddled with the guilt of taking a loving mother away from an innocent family. It might just be enough to push you over the edge to side against the Institute. But no, apparently we can't have anything complex or interesting. Fallout 4 gives us the Institute, one of the most technologically advanced places in the world right now, full of some of the smartest people who seemingly have no reason to exist besides to be a boogeyman for the main plot. Bethesda goes through all the effort of setting up a backstory when it's all meaningless and contradictory anyways. The Institute has no goals, they have no motivation, they have no purpose. Can anyone tell me what the Institute actually wants to do? And don't fucking say they're doing it for the future of mankind or whatever. That's such a vague fucking bullshit statement, they may as well have said nothing at all. Every action they take is a detriment to everyone outside the Institute. They actively kidnap people. They actively release threats to people on the servers, yet say no one has anything to fear from them. Fallout 4 gives us the synths, and let's just drop any fucking pretense here. They're absolutely an allegory for slavery. In a game series that has already shown slavery to exist multiple times. They don't even do anything deep or interesting with it. It's just kind of there for some reason. All these major elements introduced in Fallout 4 are entirely meaningless, and the comparison with Nick continues, as Nick as a character is pointless. Bethesda seems to mistake learning about a character for actual character growth. Nick is generic good guy detective, and if you keep him as a companion, he'll give you his personal quest. This will take some time to explain, but it's worth it. The comparison is twofold here, for the pointlessness already mentioned, but for extreme convenience as well. In my last video, I explained the coincidences needed to actually reach the Institute, and as I said, Nick Valentine is a microcosm of the overall game. Because, you see, Nick himself is the memories and personalities of a pre-war cop shoved into his synth. So he has all the same beliefs, opinions, ideas, and most importantly, life experiences of the original Nick Valentine. As such, his story is his girlfriend was murdered by Johnny Winter, a mobster he was investigating before the war, and his quest is the fact he wants closure. When I first got this quest, I very foolishly thought that it might be a more story-heavy quest in which we maybe learn how this mob boss died so Nick can have some closure. Maybe the real Nick took him down at some point after the brain scan, thus our Nick would have no memory of it. Nope, Johnny Winter is still alive as a ghoul. He ghoulified himself before the war and locked himself in a bunker in the train station. What? To top it off, you can only access his bunker with the combination password. No, it isn't 12345 like it was with the railroad. Somehow it's actually even more stupid. He hid parts of the password on numerous holotapes, which were taken as evidence by the cops before the war, and for some reason, they didn't keep them in one place. They spread the evidence across numerous police stations. You need to collect all the holotapes to gain access to his bunker. Every single one of them are all intact and still in their original locations. So you collect the holotapes, enter the bunker, and confront Johnny Winter, who has no armor, only one gun, and hasn't gone insane or feral in his 210 years alone, but also somehow survived without food and water, a topic we very much will be returning to shortly. Oh, there's food and drink in the room, but not 210 years worth. Once Winter is dead, Nick leads you to the surface and kneels down on the ground, saying this is where his girlfriend was killed, literally right above Johnny Winter's bunker. I hope I don't need to explain the absurdity of all these coincidences. Likewise with the coincidences that led you to the Institute. Having a couple coincidences is fine, but too many and you risk ruining the suspension of disbelief. In both cases, that becomes absolutely farcical. I can't take Nick's shitty quest seriously because of this. Bethesda tries to write a serious moment where we learn about Nick's past, losing his girlfriend, and wanting vengeance against the man responsible. A strangely familiar scenario. I can't place why, but instead of being a heartfelt moment with character growth, it's just another vague thing for the player to do with no substance or meaning, and Nick doesn't grow from it. Johnny Winter almost literally exists within a bubble. He's locked in a box and has no reason to exist as a character besides being the target of a quest to kill. What's his backstory? He was a mob boss. What's he doing now? Literally fucking nothing! How is this any fucking different from a Radiant quest besides the fact that it has no randomized spawn points or locations? Go kill Johnny Winter because he's a bad guy that needs to be killed. Go kill random super mutant number 4832 because he's a bad guy that needs to be killed. Fallout 1 had Gizmo, a sleazy casino owner who wanted to take over Junktown and hires a hitman to kill Killian, who tries to keep some semblance of law and order in town. Fallout 2 had the Mordino family, in which they try to gain influence and take over New Reno and Redding through getting people addicted to Jet. They both have goals they're working towards and are part of the world. Both games have different endings depending on the outcome of these situations, showing the characters are still doing things. Johnny Winter is sitting in a room waiting to be killed, and nothing happens if you never kill him. As explained earlier, there is no end slideshow that details the effects of your action, just a generic cunt scene. I know I'm talking a lot about Nick here, but that's just for comparison that it isn't just the main story that has these issues. It's the entire fucking game. Nick isn't just coincidentally a microcosm of the main story. Lack of substance, meaning, goals, motivation, and proper characterization is the rot in the foundation of this entire game, to the point everything we're shown and told is either completely meaningless or can't be trusted, making Fallout 4 as a whole absolutely worthless to the lore and history of the Fallout franchise. There are more examples of this too. The lack of meaning applies to the main story, beyond simply the twist though. After the twist is revealed, you're just running errands for each faction. As discussed, there's two choices at the end of the game. Nuke the Institute, which is of no benefit to anyone, or join the Institute and wipe out the other factions, which includes blowing up the Brotherhood's Led Zeppelin. If you join the Railroad, you get to see both. Once again, spectacle over substance. Fallout 1 and 2 ended with the Master's Lair and the Enclave's oil rig being nuked as a finale to well-told stories. The spectacle was part of the story. There were reasons for the nukes going off. It wasn't a bullshit explosion simply for the sake of an explosion. Or, to put it another way, the story wasn't an excuse for the special effects, which is exactly why I referenced George Lucas's quote in the last video. Here's another quote for you.
Wells used special effects to extensively tell a story, and Lucas used a story to extensively tell special effects. But Kane is primarily about the characters, and it's way more interesting to watch just because of the attention to detail, the direction, and the framing. Now, comparing Episode 3 to Citizen Kane is not fair, I'll agree. Episode 3 is an art, it's commercial diarrhea.
And this absolutely applies to Bethesda and their games now. The Master's super mutant army were indoctrinated zealots who believed in his vision for the future to the point Marcus in Fallout 2 outright still believes the Master's vision and says his Brotherhood of Steel friend would have made a good mutant. The Master himself may not have been able to talk his army down, not to mention the guilt he must have felt. They had to take the nuclear option to eliminate the threat. Likewise, the Enclave were fanatics obsessed with the purity of their DNA, and even with their leadership removed, they were still a trained and organized military force. Eliminating them in that way was basically the only option. In Fallout 4, you become the leader of the Institute, and should be able to hand down orders and control the situation and try to make peace. But you're still following Sean's directions until he dies, including wiping out the Railroad and the Brotherhood, which you have no say in unless you betray the Institute and destroy them. And after Sean is dead, you have little to no control over the Institute's future. You're essentially a pointless figurehead. Otherwise, the other three factions just have you outright nuke the Institute for no reason. Even when you're with the Railroad, and you're made leader of the Institute, you are simply not allowed the ability to just order the Institute to not be evil. You can't control them from within. You can't negotiate anything. The option doesn't even exist. Things are just the way they are because reasons. Don't think about it. Just look at the cool nuclear explosion. Spectacle over substance. This game is massively and absurdly inconsistent to an insane degree, to the point it's actually amazing it was released in this state. It's like they took the first draft of the story and said, good enough, and just rolled with it. Did no one on their team question any of these issues or errors? Did no one realize this game was rife with massive inconsistencies? The case of 3 Synths is a great example of there being no consistency right off the top. This isn't even counting the retcons. Speaking of which, let's talk about some, shall we? Like how Enclave power armor that was developed by the Enclave after the war could be found in pre-war locations. Or how Fallout 4 introduces T-60 power armor as another pre-war model, when the most advanced set of pre-war power armor was established to be T-51B. Or how Liberty Prime was apparently deployed to Anchorage, Alaska, despite being incomplete in Fallout 3 due to a proper power supply not being developed yet. Or how about the fact that the drug Jet is now a pre-war drug, showing up in a vault based around people with drug addiction, as well as appearing in loot in pre-war locations, despite being made by a kid named Myron slightly before the events of Fallout 2. And it was a major plot point in Fallout 2 because, as I referenced earlier, the Mordino family was using it to try and take over the region. They didn't just say it happened either. The actual process of inventing Jet was detailed in Fallout 2.
Yeah, what? Can't you see I'm thinking here? Yeah, what's on your mind? We've been over this. I'm not here to be your memory. In my lab? Next question? Christ. Well, when I came across the Mordino family way back when, they were farming peyote cacti and trying to sell it to tourists as the Reno experience. Total bullshit. I mean, peyote? Come on. It isn't even half the strength of, say, old school LSD. Plus, a peyote trip is too long. The profits and fast turnaround and high addiction, like barbiturates before the big one, you know? Right. Can I finish? Problem is, in the new climate, we can't grow most of the veggies needed for the best drugs. Couldn't grow coca plants, opium poppies. Oh man, did we try. So we figured our best bet was shrooms. You can grow them if you use plenty of Brahmin shit as fertilizer. Plus, hallucinogens have low overhead, so I started experimenting with derivatives of lysergic acid diethylamide and psilocybin. Still, I really wanted to whip up a hard hitter that didn't rely on veggie extracts. Man, was I an idiot, because the answer turned out to be the extracts, or more precisely, what they were growing in. You see, old Jesus Mordino wanted something that the Redding miners would get addicted to fast and make them work harder. So I said, no prob, right? Well, it wasn't too hard to come up with a good upper. A sample of that pre-war protein extract corrupted and bam, decent amphetamine. Before the big ones, some meat companies were experimenting with a cheap protein extract for growing food, but they had to ditch it. One little skin bacteria contaminates it and it's all screwed. The contaminated version acted like an amphetamine when ingested. A little side effect. Don't ask, it's, technical. I didn't have to. When they first screwed up, they contaminated tons of that shit. And rather than ditch it, they fed it to their Brahmin herds to try and recoup their losses. Close. See, we started experimenting with the Brahmin shit as fertilizer for the shrooms. Except get this, then we noticed the slaves working the fertilizer vats were getting high from the fumes. Right. By putting tons of Brahmin shit in the vats, we found out that the fumes give more than enough of a kick. Eureka! Literally. Of course, we had to test to get the mix right. About 100 slaves? Mostly heart attacks, cerebral hemorrhages, psychotic episodes, that sort of thing. Well, not on purpose. I mean, slaves are expensive. Still, we made the money back in the first few months, so the Mordino family wasn't too pissed at me. You're getting bent at me over a bunch of slaves? Hey, we had to make sure Jet wouldn't kill our customers.
The only real defense for this I've seen is people blaming the looting system. So allow me to show you why that's bullshit. They've been using pretty much the same method of loot generation since back in Morrowind. I messed around with the construction set a lot for both Morrowind and Oblivion, so I know how some of these things work. I also verified by checking Fallout 4's creation kit. See, if you want to spawn random loot, you make what is essentially a list of items. This is called leveled item in the creation kit, and in this list you put the items you want to potentially appear and set their chances of spawning and so forth. So, for instance, if I wanted to create a list of pre-war chems, I can go into the menu and... Wait, what? It already exists? Let's check this out. Oh. Literally all they had to do was remove Jet from this list and place this list in pre-war containers. They would also have to remove all references to Jet from the pre-war Vault-Tec computer. Fixing this would literally take 5 minutes at most, and they could push it out in the next patch, which they've made clear they're not shy of doing with their Creation Club updates. And by the way, if you want to argue the same point on the Exo-1 Power Armor, aka Enclave Power Armor, then have a nice long look at this travesty. That's right. Thanks to this abomination, Enclave Power Armor is cemented as pre-war, in case it wasn't clear enough yet. This also applies to every issue regarding misplaced loot spawns. So yeah, consider that argument debunked. Then there's a little quest called Kid in a Fridge, another microcosm of Fallout 4 as a whole. I swear to God this isn't as dumb as it sounds. Oh no, it's way fucking dumber than it sounds. Kid in a Fridge is a quest where you find a kid in a fridge.
Hey, where's John?
What's all the excitement?
Wakanda! We can't find John. He was heading that way.
Oh no. Check that old refrigerator.
Thanks, Wakanda.
Remember, never get in anything that could close up and trap you.
Like an old trunk or an abandoned refrigerator. Now we know.
And knowing is half the battle.
He's a ghoul and has been trapped in this fridge for 210 years. He gets out and wants to go home to his parents. So your obvious thought is, oh shit, this kid's parents are probably dead. So you take him to the house he lived in before the bombs dropped, and his parents are still there.
I hate this.
Alive as ghouls as well.
It is revolting.
They're just kind of fucking standing there in the kitchen like creepy robots, as if their only purpose for existing was this quest. Spoiler, that is their only purpose. Also, along the way, a gunner wants to buy the kid off you as a slave, and if you refuse, he'll show up to the house with a few of his buddies to try and raid the place and take the ghouls as prisoners. So, let's go over what's wrong with this in detail. Ghouls are established in Fallout 1 to need water to live. Because if you don't repair their water pump, they will absolutely die out, as will their city of Necropolis.
The ghouls of Necropolis learn firsthand the final meaning of dehydration as their city succumbs to the desert sands and the water runs out. Without their water purifying control chip, they do not survive.
It can be assumed they need food too, because we don't get any info contradicting this. This is backed up by Fallout 4 itself, in which not only do ghouls require food and water as part of the settlement building system, but there's also even a settlement location that's initially entirely populated by ghouls who are growing their own food. So even if you ignore the game mechanics from a storytelling perspective, there's an actual group who grows their own food. Not even mentioning the fact that there's a settlement full of Mr. Handys that don't require food and water for themselves, so this can obviously be applied to ghouls as well if they wanted. So right off the top, Kin in a Fridge contradicts and retcons previously established lore, but also contradicts Fallout 4 itself, once again. But it gets worse than that, because we have to go over the absurd amount of coincidences yet again. Number 1, the fact the kid survived the bombs dropping at all. Number 2, the fact he apparently didn't also need air for 210 years. Number 3, the fact his parents both survived the bombs dropping at all. Number 4, the fact that all 3 happened to become ghouls. Number 5, the fact that none of them became feral ghouls. Number 6, the fact that no one found this fridge sitting out in the open for 210 years and opened it looking to scavenge food. Number 7, the fact that no animals or mutated monsters of any kind found the fridge and decided to break into it for a meal in 210 years. Number 8, the fact that no raiders or super mutants or other baddies used the fridge for target practice in 210 years. Number 9, the fact his parents weren't captured as slaves for 210 years. Number 10, the fact his parents weren't killed by raiders or super mutants or animals or any other threat in 210 years. Number 11, the fact his house managed to not get completely destroyed. Number 12, the fact his parents still live in the same house for 210 years. Number 13, the fact they themselves didn't find him even though he's a short walk away. Number 14, the fact he didn't go insane from lack of social interaction for 210 years. Number 15, that no one else just so happened to walk past this fridge for 210 years until you do. So, only by a miraculous string of coincidences, as well as retconning lore, can this quest exist as it does. How is this anything but a farce? Games are a visual medium. What you tell and show the player is absolutely vital. Fallout 4 is showing us ghouls don't need to eat or drink. Therefore, the entire choice, the moral decision with Necropolis and the struggles of the ghouls there, any meaning that entire segment of Fallout 1 had, is completely undermined, made pointless and irrelevant, all thanks to Kid in a Fridge. Because if he didn't need food and water, then neither do they or any other ghoul in the franchise. And if it's not showing us that, it's showing us the writers were either lazy, incompetent, or don't care about what they're writing. What we see in our entertainment media informs us about how these worlds work, but contradicting that for no reason devalues that world and its lore as a whole. When you say something like, ghouls need water, then double back and say, ghouls don't need water, you're telling the audience they're stupid. You're telling them they're stupid by either expecting them to accept both things as true, even though they're mutually exclusive, or you're telling them they're stupid for paying attention to the details and intricacies of this world just for it to not matter at all, and by extension you're telling the audience that the details don't matter. This reduces deep and interesting worlds down to just an excuse to kill some baddies. This is why people have such a big issue with retcons and plot holes, in general. Because it always undermines the entire story. It's the same reason I don't trust people who lie. You've proven to have lied before, why wouldn't you lie again? If you're going to be contradictory, why should I spend my time engaging in your entertainment media? You're already telling me it's a waste of time by being inconsistent. It's telling me you're incapable or don't care enough to make a consistent story. So why should I accept any other info you tell me about this world, when you've proven you're willing to go back on it or outright just make stuff up for the sake of convenience? But, moving away from that, possibly one of the biggest contradictions of all is the one this entire game is predicated on. The fact that the Institute took Sean because he was a pure human that never had any exposure to radiation. Let's quickly go over this frame by frame. He's not tainted by radiation, and now he's tainted by radiation. You see, gamma radiation travels at the speed of light, so simply being in view of a nuclear explosion and unshielded means that everyone on that platform was exposed to radiation, including Sean, which makes him absolutely worthless for the Institute's intentions. They might have been able to do something interesting with this if him being impure was what was causing the synths to malfunction so badly, and this was also the cause of the cancer that kills him. But no! I mean, even then you'd need to explain why the Institute never went over his medical, so maybe it wouldn't work out. But hey, at least it's more depth than absolutely fucking nothing. Back to radiation traveling at the speed of light, I wouldn't exactly call this common knowledge, but I feel a good comparison as to shitty crime dramas where characters throw out technobabble without knowing what any of the words mean, especially when it applies to hacking. So many fucking movies and TV shows do this shit, it's painful to watch every time. So even the basis of the story for this game is flawed from the outset. This is what I mean when I say Bethesda just doesn't fucking care. Never mind contradicting or retconning the original games. Never fucking mind them contradicting their own fucking game, Fallout 3. They can't even keep the game they were making consistent with itself. Why am I railing on so hard about this? Because the lore is our fundamental understanding of how the world works. The stories are our reasons for doing things. The characters are what give life to the world we see, and logical internal consistency is what binds it all together to form an interesting world to explore. When these things are broken, our actions and reasons for doing things become meaningless, besides purely wasting time. It may be increasing your character stats, which is pointless on its own. As a result, we can no longer properly understand the world. I am absolutely not saying fiction has to be rigidly stuck to the logic of the real world. Radiation won't turn you into a ghoul in the real world, it'll just kill you. Changes like this are fine, it's what establishes works of fiction as unique. Without changes like that, or magic or whatever else, we can't have Lord of the Rings or Elder Scrolls or Star Wars. But when you establish the way things work in a fictional world, you're telling the viewer specific information that forms their understanding, and as a result, you must stick to it to maintain internal consistency. But what is the purpose in telling the player one thing, then doing something completely contradictory to it? What is the point in trying to tell the player any kind of serious story to try and get them invested in the world and the story if it doesn't make sense? The logic is broken and the world ceases to make any sense. Now your audience doesn't know what to think because the world has proven that what it's taught you is worthless. Most importantly, why should I get invested in a game? Why should I pay attention to the world and characters and details? Why should I invest my time into this game when the developers will not invest their time into making it good? When they will not invest their time in making it worth my time? Just a side note, there's an obvious exception to parodies and comedies. I don't expect Futurama or anything like Monty Python to make logical storytelling sense. Let's say I make my own post-apocalypse game and have a big long intro cutscene. The area of the world the game takes place in is in a massive food shortage. Rampaging famine, people are dying of starvation, it's fucking horrible. Cutscene ends and you load into the game to find yourself in the middle of a vast green field with all types of food growing. Apples, strawberries, watermelon, potatoes, carrots, and so forth. What are you, the player, supposed to believe at this point? Quest givers are talking about how they're starving or their people are dying, despite standing right next to a wagon full of perfectly fine and edible oranges. It is meaningless to be sent on a quest to find food when there's abundant food all around. Now that's just an example I thought up on my own, and I use such an extreme and absurd example to highlight why there's such a focus on Fallout's lore being fucked up by Bethesda. These aren't just little issues that are being nitpicked. They are fundamental issues with the very foundation of the story and the world the game is trying to present. The consistency in Fallout is now basically non-existent thanks to Bethesda. The best info I could find on the subject says it took 4 years each to make Fallout 3 and Fallout 4. For a point of reference, Fallout New Vegas was made in a year and a half by a smaller team with a smaller budget, and they weren't even familiar with Bethesda's toolset, and it was so well done despite its technical flaws that not only blew Fallout 3 out of the water, but blew out Fallout 4 and 76 out of the water as well. So, instead of taking a lesson from Obsidian and the success of New Vegas, instead of looking into what made that game great and why so many of the fans praise it as the best Fallout game, instead of looking at why people disliked Fallout 3 and still like the original Fallout games better, Bethesda instead decided to learn nothing and double down and make it worse. There is a reason 1, 2, and New Vegas are praised so much, and it isn't just nostalgia. There's also a very good reason people disliked 3, 4, and now 76 so much, and it sure as fuck isn't because it's new or because it's Bethesda or anything as petty and stupid as that. The argument that people like things because they're old or hate things because they're new is so fucking asinine it only serves to write off legitimate criticism. Yes, there are some people like that in the world. No, they are absolutely not the majority of people who criticize these games. This also applies to my love of Morrowind and hatred of Skyrim. It's because Bethesda is taking these two beloved franchises and dumbing them down in nearly every fucking way. They strip away everything that made these series good in the first place. The depth, the stories, the mechanics, the lore, and characters are all stripped out or dumbed down. The difference between Morrowind, Fallout 1, 2, and New Vegas versus Fallout 3, 4, 76, and Skyrim is the difference between baseball
The 1-1 from Dodson. Batista with a try. Deep left field. No doubt about it.
and T-ball. When Bethesda sells an Elder Scrolls game or a Fallout game as a story-rich RPG now, it's selling someone a ticket to a baseball game, but presenting them with a T-ball game. Bethesda no longer cares about what made their games good. They care about slapping together a product and making bank off an established and beloved title. They've distilled Fallout down to aesthetic, rather than the core of what made the games beloved in the first place. Seeing everyone losing their shit over Fallout 76, and realizing Bethesda isn't as great as everyone thought feels like vindication to me. When people are saying 76 makes them look back at Bethesda's previous releases with suspicion and realizes they're maybe not as great as they remember, it makes me ask, where have you been all this time? I've been following Bethesda since Morrowind, a game that single-handedly set me on my path in life, my dream to make video games, a goal I'm working towards in between doing these videos. I'd have considered myself a fanboy for a time, and I did ignore some issues for a while, though as far back as Oblivion, I'd been making complaints about quality. Only about a year after Skyrim's release did I finally become critical of the entertainment media I consume, and hold it to a higher standard. And with that came the realization there has been a steady downward spiral, a consistent and constant dumbing down and oversimplification with each release. This isn't even mentioning Fallout Shelter, which itself reduces Fallout as a whole to a fucking microtransaction shop. There are more bad Fallout games than good ones now. The Fallout franchise, built on its RPG mechanics, deep lore, characterization, unique world, and interesting stories, has been reduced to a shallow husk of its former self. The most bottom-of-the-barrel, dumb fuck shooter with a totally worthless story written by people with no imagination, token RPG mechanics, absolutely two-dimensional characters, broken lore and history, and exists solely as a brand to sell people and to sell shit to people with no heart or soul. This is something I've been saying for a while, and it's something I'm going to keep saying as long as it's true. so I might be repeating myself for a very long time. All Fallout is to Bethesda are its surface-level, superficial aspects. The iconography of the series, everything that's marketable, Power Armor, Brotherhood of Steel, the Enclave, Super Mutants, Vault Boy, Vault Tech, Nuka-Cola, Ghouls. The lore and history behind these things mean nothing, only their appearance. Nothing else fucking matters to them. Fallout 3 could have been excused as a blunder, a rushed fuck-up bastard child to plant their flag in the series. Obsidian laid the groundwork for Bethesda to carry on the series, keeping true to what made it great. But Bethesda took no lessons from that, instead gave us Fallout 4 and Fallout 76, two colossal fuck-ups, absolutely cementing the fact they do not care about the series for what made it great, only for its power as a brand, as a recognizable name, and in a mere 2 fucking games have rendered their lore worthless. If Bethesda were to sell ownership of the franchise tomorrow, fixing it would absolutely require retconning Fallout 4 and 76 as a whole. Maybe Fallout 3 as well, but New Vegas was unfortunately forced to confirm some of 3's lore. For all intents and purposes, Fallout is dead. There is no point for myself and many others to buy the next game because we know what to expect from Bethesda. More poor writing full of plot holes, more retcons, less RPG mechanics, less choice, if that's even fucking possible. More dumbed down busy work quests with no substance, meant to keep you busy. What many people consider to be the last bastion of AAA that wasn't shit went septic years ago. A lot of people are only now noticing the smell. And despite that, despite all the issues, Bethesda will still have people defending them. The shills who make a living off praising Bethesda's games, the fanboys who could see nothing wrong with any of the issues, and will go to extremes to defend Bethesda and their fuck-ups, and if they can't defend against facts, they call you a toxic, entitled hater, ignore anything you have to say anyways. If you don't think story is too important, then I've got a game to sell you. It's called Hunt Down the Freemen. And yet, despite all that, despite everything I've said so far, despite how long this video has gone on, I'm not done yet. Because, you see, there's still more factions to talk about. Oh yeah, I've talked about the joinable factions, but this game isn't just limited to the joinable ones. There are others that exist within the world, and they absolutely require discussion as well. As I've explained since the start of this video, the major joinable factions have a plethora of issues. I'd argue none of them are fleshed out well, especially the Minutemen, but this extends beyond that. Presented as a major force in the wasteland, the Gunners essentially boil down to generic bad guys with guns. They're a mercenary group that will take any job and are shown to be highly militaristic, going so far as to have their own working vertibirds. Yet, they're also openly hostile to anyone who isn't written to have hired them for some reason, including the player. As such, it's impossible to hire them for yourself. This reduces the Gunners from a potentially interesting faction had they been developed more, into basically raiders that aren't officially raiders, for the sake of story purposes sometimes. They could have been far more interesting had they been developed as an actual faction, but as it stands now, they exist solely as enemies in the world and are used in a few rare cases when they're needed, where raiders just wouldn't work. Instead, what they should have done was turn the Gunners into a full-on joinable faction, which could result in your character doing some evil shit. See, in the last video, I described a scenario where your character would have to adapt to, or embrace, the morality of the post-apocalypse world, and this could have been an interesting way to do it. As an alternate path, you could seek help from the Gunners, and in doing so, end up joining them. You start doing missions for them, and as you do so, the Minutemen are rebuilding themselves, like in the scenario I described earlier. Your relationship with the Gunners leads you down a darker path, embracing the new world's morality, and that of the Gunners, eventually getting into skirmishes with the Minutemen, who are now maybe lacking proper leadership due to your absence. They launch a premature attack on Quincy and you defeat them. It's a massacre. This leads into a war in which you start taking over the Minutemen's basis of operations for the Gunners. The Castle, Concord, Sanctuary Hills, and in doing so, effectively giving control of the Commonwealth to the Gunners. This is capped off with taking over or destroying the Institute. Maybe this isn't the best idea ever, but sure is a hell of a lot better than the nothing they are in the base game. With the Minutemen and the Gunners, I've explained a few instances where this game is severely lacking depth and character. Going into the topic of the Triggermen brings me to a new discussion. If I had to describe this game in only 2 words besides worthless trash, absolute shit, fucking garbage, piece of shit, an absolute and complete waste of your valuable time that could be better spent doing other things, or shitty game, it would be wasted potential. And I honestly think that describes a lot of the game as a whole. The absolute worst thing a bad game can be is almost good. There is so much almost good in Fallout 4 that never got developed, it's fucking painful. Besides its plethora of issues I've already discussed and I've yet to discuss in future parts of this analysis, one of Fallout 4's biggest issues is its wasted potential. There are so many instances within this game where untapped potential exists for something that could have been interesting but was ultimately underdeveloped. Like the Minutemen and the Gunners, the Triggermen are another two-dimensional faction with no substance. Presented as an old-world mafia-type group, they exist for the sake of a couple quests and not much else. The first time you'll likely see them is in rescuing Nick Valentine, who is entirely relevant to this discussion. During this sequence, you learn there's some kind of history between Nick and Skinny Malone, but it's never expanded upon. You either kill him, or you talk him down and he immediately becomes completely irrelevant. Skinny Malone as a whole, as well as his history with Nick, are completely without substance. They're just meaningless word salad tossed at the player for a cheap explanation for the events that are happening. There's no depth, there's no true history, there's no backstory. The backstory is Nick and Malone were rivals, or something. That's it, explained away in a single line. We also hear Malone and his gang have been pushed out of Goodneighbor, and that's why they're living in a vault. So now Nick, the Triggerman, and Malone are all severely lacking depth and character. This brings me back to the missing potential I was talking about. It feels like we're just barely missing a few elements to a setup for something far greater. Maybe there's a bigger threat growing, one that might force the player, Nick, and Malone to team up. This also plays into the whole morality aspect as well. Here's a scenario I've come up with based on that. There is indeed a growing threat. Another rival gang, possibly following a similar path to the Mordinos from Fallout 2, in which they're trying to control the region via getting people addicted to chems, or maybe they have some other goals and intentions in mind. Either way, they're far more sinister. They have power, money, and influence, and they're growing. They're responsible for pushing Malone out. If they're not taken care of now, they might become near unstoppable. This causes Nick to realize that maybe Malone is the lesser of two evils, and maybe not necessarily sides with him, but teams up with him for the time being to take out the greater threat. As a result, there's a dichotomy in this questline where Nick's path of righteous morality and Malone's path of thuggish violence. Many situations arise where you have to make choices between the two, and the answer isn't always clear. Malone could shake people down, something Nick would never do, and Nick could do some serious investigating and following leads, something Malone might not have the patience for. Doing things Nick's way might not always be the right decision, and Malone's might not always be the wrong decision. Yet, at the same time, there are clear good and bad moral decisions that affect your character's overall outcome. Again, sticking to the path of morality or embracing the darker side of this new world. For another layer of depth, this could affect Nick and Malone as well. If you keep pushing Nick, you can maybe turn him into a dirty cop type character. As for Malone, maybe you can pull him back from his criminal origins and make him realize he's been a bad guy. Or you could do the total opposite and push Malone farther down the darker path. Instead of simply taking out this rival gang, he takes it over. Likewise, you can reinforce Nick's beliefs and essentially make him a paragon of justice. Again, same as the Gunners, this isn't the best idea ever, but still a hell of a lot more depth than a worthless throwaway line and never expanded upon again. The default, basic human enemy of the game. They seem like an obvious playable faction, yet at the same time I think Raiders might be a little too chaotic and unpredictable to have any kind of meaningful story. I'm not saying it's impossible or that I'm against the idea, but more the fact that Raiders are rather simple in their goals and desires. That said, I do wish they were more developed in some way. As it stands, Raiders are generic bad guy enemies and amount to little more than that. There's some terminal logs for them at some of their bases, but amounts to little more than flavor text at best, or an excuse for Raiders making a base out of some location at worst. There are two minor exceptions that I've found, but nothing interesting is done with them either. The first are a small clan of Raiders named The Forged. They're involved in one whole quest and have no development beyond the fact that they're Raiders who like fire or something. The other is involved in one of the lamest quests in the entire game, one I'll be discussing more in detail in the next video. A guy pretends to be a scavenger and asks you to fix his water pump so he can empty out a quarry. If you come back later, you find it's entirely populated by Raiders and he's the leader of the group. Something interesting could have been done with this, but no, it's just more generic enemies to shoot. Also, does anyone else think a giant hole in the ground is a bad place for a base of operations? You're intentionally taking the low ground to literally any and every enemy that would approach you. What would have been far more interesting is if Bethesda had developed a few specific large Raider clans with their own personalities, traits, and goals, as well as a couple smaller ones. But beyond that, make them dynamic as well, where they can battle each other and claim or lose territory to other clans, and actually spread out and expand in natural ways. Imagine this, instead of just generic Raiders, we have 4 major clans with their own themes. For this example, I'm going to use some generic ones. Cannibals, drug dealers and addicts, maybe anarchists, and the previously mentioned Forged. They each have notable territory, and the decoration of Raider encampments can change depending on who is currently in control of it. Do the cannibals control this camp? It's covered in various types of bone decorations. Do the Forged control this location? There's their insignia made of metal. It would add an interesting dynamic to the world that, sure, some people might miss, but would help make the world feel more alive. There isn't just one big generic group of Raiders in the world. There's individual groups that are constantly gaining and losing territory with their rivals. Hell, maybe you could even develop a side storyline based on that where you join one of the clans and help them establish dominance. Oh boy. Super Mutants. This is where it gets complicated because we actually have to go into some of the history of the Super Mutants to even discuss this. The FEV, Forced Evolutionary Virus, is introduced in Fallout 1. It's essentially presented as a top-secret government project. The FEV started off as the PvP, Pan Immunity Viren Project. This was being developed by infamous nylon bag producer Westech, who is also a major defense contractor for the USA. They developed power armor, a variety of weapons including laser, plasma, biological, and chemical, and most importantly, the PvP itself. The PvP was made out of fear of the Chinese developing their own biological weapons, so the intent behind the PvP would be to make humans immune to viruses and disease. A side effect during testing was mutation, particularly a growth of muscle mass and brain activity. The US Army realized this could be used to turn the average soldier into a super soldier, many times more powerful and smarter than the average person. They took over the project and moved it to Mariposa Military Base and changed the name of the PvP to the FEV, and they began testing it in secret. Here's where things get very critical as far as storytelling goes. The FEV at this point is essentially seen as the real-world equivalent of the atomic bomb in 1945. That is to say, a weapon that could end the war. When dealing with something that's top secret, it's generally understood you don't go sharing it about on a whim. Coupled with the fact that the USA was infested with Chinese spies, it's very unlikely they would just go about sharing the FEV with any random group, even within their own government. Let's say, just for example, Vault-Tec. The purpose of the vaults were to save some people to rebuild the world, but also to perform a variety of experiments on people to see how they would react in certain scenarios. This also allowed room for other types of experimentation. That said, I don't believe the FEV would so easily be shared with Vault-Tec. If a sample, or even the formula for the FEV got out, it could spell disaster for the war effort. Rather than gaining an advantage over the Chinese through the use of FEV, it would just bring them to a level playing field again. This is absolutely something you would not want your active enemies to get a hold of during the war. Sharing FEV with Vault-Tec would be like sharing that atomic bomb with the Coast Guard. As a result, Vault 87 and its alternate strain of FEV in Fallout 3 feels like an ass-pull, an excuse to shove the super mutants into a new game in a different part of the country. Especially since the super mutants themselves in Fallout 3 are just angry orcs. This is a sentiment you may see shared by other YouTubers such as Mr. Caption or H-Bomber Guy, and potentially others, but they say as much for a good reason. Someone explained to me the need to reuse elements from an older game if you're not going to do anything interesting with it. Just look at this progression and think about it for a minute. The super mutants in Fallout 1 followed the Master's plan, attempting to convert everyone into their master race in order to bring about world peace. The super mutants in Fallout 2, with no means to continue that goal, try to fit into the world. There's some fear and hatred of them by normal people, and there's themes of racism, yet they're still presented as individuals with their own goals and beliefs. The super mutants of Fallout 3 are all stupid and angry all the time. All they want is to rip and tear, kill and eat you, and everyone else, and sometimes kidnap people to turn them into super mutants too. The super mutants in Fallout 4 are all stupid and angry all the time. All they want is to rip and tear, kill and eat you and everyone else. A race in the previous games that was complex and interesting, had goals, ideas, their own beliefs and personalities, and even struggles, is reduced to generic angry enemies to shoot at. In that sense, how are they much different from raiders? Now, this is a Fallout 4 analysis, and I've been talking an awful lot about Fallout 3 here. And this is for good reason, because Fallout 4 only compounds these issues. Thought Vault-Tec having FEV was stupid? Well, think again, motherfuckers. Imagine a random fucking college having FEV. I've discussed this to a degree earlier during the Institute section, but I'm going in deeper here. We find out in the Brotherhood path this is a different strain of FEV from both Mariposa and Vault 87, thanks to a terminal log that states these super mutants are different. Yet, once again, nothing is done with this. The super mutants are still just angry orcs with no real personality. In fact, they're even worse for the fact they have suicide bomber mutants. And let's think about this real carefully for a minute. The fact they have suicide bombers means they have no sense of self-preservation. This is compounded by the fact they have no method to create new super mutants. They are on a collision course to wiping themselves out and are too stupid to realize it. The Vault 87 super mutants at least had their own source of FEV in which they were in total control of, but the Commonwealth super mutants don't. They're all created by the Institute in a project that was forcibly shut down. Now they don't know that, yet still have no method of reproduction and are therefore willingly killing themselves despite not being able to continue their species in any way. This all raises questions. Where did the Institute get its FEV from? Why do they have it? Why are they wasting so much time and energy making super mutants and sending them to the surface? As explained earlier, they have to be very careful with their power usage and try to save as much energy as possible. And this is with the FEV labs down already. How much greater would the strain have been on their systems with the FEV lab teleporting super mutants to the surface every few hours? More so, why would they risk their own surface missions by intentionally adding greater threats to the wasteland above? The ruins of CIT itself has super mutants inside it, fighting the Institute's own synth forces. What logical sense does this make? Just how many people have the Institute turned into super mutants? It's not an insignificant number, I can tell you that. They're still adamant the surface has nothing to fear despite using them as test subjects, and intentionally making the surface more dangerous for them to live in numerous means. This is an argument Mr. Caption made in his own Fallout 3 videos, which I highly recommend people watch. Links in the description. But I'm going to make the same argument here. Take the super mutants and FEV of Fallout 3 and 4 and replace them with literally anything else. Come up with something new on your own. They function exactly the same as they do in-game now, but they're called something else and look different. Is anything lost in the process? Is there any detriment to the storytelling of these games? Probably not. In fact, if anything, it provides a base to create something new and potentially interesting from, rather than taking an existing concept and dumbing it down so as to make it meaningless, and that's what it ultimately is. The super mutants in Fallout 3 and 4 are, like much of the issues I've discussed so far, meaningless and without substance. They lacked the nuance that made the original super mutants interesting as a group. There's a bare minimum reasoning for them being there, and that's about the extent of it. Besides that, they're just different flavors of enemies to shoot at. Instead of raiders, there's bigger, dumber raiders that want to eat people. This is the equivalent of taking the interesting and well-defined character of Luke Skywalker and reducing him to an angry old hermit who just wants to die. No one is stupid enough to do that. Oh god, no, fuck! The last faction I'll be talking about is, of course, the Children of Adam. I truly have saved the worst for last. I just flat out hate them and don't think they should exist as a faction. This is a group introduced in Fallout 3 and they evolved from an incredibly obnoxious asshole, constantly shouting a megaton, into a full-blown religious group that has apparently spread as far as Boston. This is retarded, incredibly so. While I won't deny the fact that people can and do believe in ridiculous shit, I don't believe their existence adds anything to the series. They're just fucking obnoxious in every way possible, compounded by the fact that Bethesda doesn't write characters, they write two-dimensional walking tropes. Instead of even attempting to make them interesting, they're all just spaced out generic religious fanatics. In fact, between Fallout 3 and 4, they've evolved into a full-blown radicalized cult, hostile to anyone who isn't a part of their group. They specifically use gamma guns, weapons that only do radiation damage and are super fucking annoying to deal with, because instead of radiation being separate from your health, radiation is now an active debuff to your max health. I swear, the only purpose of these guns existing is for the Children of Adam. All their encampments I've found are all in sites where radiation is high, including the glowing sea. You know, it goes a long way to devalue the narrative threat and danger of the glowing sea and radiation when these assholes can just play around and go swimming in it all the time and establish a functional and active town at ground zero. It turns radiation from a real threat in their world to a fucking joke. I really don't know what else I could say on the subject of the Children of Adam. I just really, really hate them and everything about them. So, what does writing a good story entail? In my opinion, every single character, location, item, event, every single element is a plot device, all of which exists solely for the plot to be progressed in a particular direction. I'd be willing to call this a fact that's hard to dispute. Everything in the story is created for the purpose of progressing a story. Therefore, it's a plot device. The difference is in how well you disguise those plot devices and how well you can present any fictional world as a real place. There are obviously varying degrees, qualities, and effectiveness at which this is done. We all know the fiction we consume is, well, fiction. I feel like I need to make some clarification here. For example, Looney Tunes doesn't need to present itself as a real world. It doesn't conform to our laws of gravity, and as such, that's fine. Not everything has to be the most story-heavy piece of entertainment with 10,000 years of history behind it. So the importance of hiding a plot device varies depending on the type of the story being made. When Bugs Bunny pulls a giant mallet out of his ass to hit Elmer Fudd, very few people would question the logical consistency of this, because it's meant to be silly and outlandish, where consistency doesn't matter. In other words, it doesn't matter that the mallet materialized out of thin air, because it's not important. There are no true stakes in Looney Tunes. The same can't be said for more serious stories such as Fallout. You cannot get away with the same thing in Game of Thrones. What I'm saying might seem really obvious to some people, but I'm going somewhere with this, trust me. Some games value gameplay over story. That's fine. A lot of people expect a certain quality to their entertainment, and they typically want it to be consistent. If you're watching Looney Tunes, odds are you don't want the silly and wacky characters to suddenly become super serious and realistic, when it's not for the sake of a joke. Much of the same absolutely applies to Fallout. When writing a story, I'd say there's two major things to take into account for any serious story. For the sake of definition, by serious story I mean anything that isn't an obvious parody, comedy, or joke. Though that said, these two components can apply to those as well if you want them to be deeper. Those components are disguising the plot devices so they're not obvious plot devices. And this is the big one, answering questions that arise from your story. This is especially true in video games that are supposed to be more story-focused. When playing a game, if you ask why, there should oftentimes be an answer. It is absolutely my belief that the why is one of the most important aspects to storytelling, because if someone is asking a why question, it means they're interested in learning more, or that they want to understand how something works. As a developer, answering the whys yourself, in turn, adds greater depth to the world you're presenting. And it's a way to avoid and prevent plot holes. And an answer to a why doesn't have to be given by a character either. Video games, especially open world video games, allow you the freedom to explore, and you can learn things by looking at the environment. A criticism against Fallout 3 was the fact that apparently no one was growing food. Therefore, everyone was surviving off scavenging 200-year-old food that should have all been looted. Fallout New Vegas came along and actually showed people to be growing and farming their own food. This isn't exactly a why, but a what. What do they eat? Ask this in Fallout 3 and there isn't really an answer. Ask this in New Vegas and you can see for yourself. In Fallout 1, the FEV does not simply exist. It explains why it exists. It explains why the super mutants are doing what they're doing. It explains why the Master's plan is futile. The FEV ceases to simply be a plot device and becomes part of the history of the world. It has a creation, a reason for being created, effects, uses, groups that have their own opinions on it. Even though it may not seem like it now, I actually gave Fallout 4 a fair chance. People are absolutely free to call me biased, and they'd be right to do so. But I'd like to think my opinion of Fallout 4 is based on both the facts I've shown and the conclusions I've come to based on the information presented in this game. For most situations in Fallout 4, there is no why, and if there is, it only raises more questions. Essentially, this scene from Futurama.
My home! It burned down! Oh, how did this happen?
That's a very good question.
So that's where I left my cigar.
That just raises further questions.
Explaining the why is imperative. Otherwise, you have a disjointed mess of elements jammed together that have no meaning or substance, which is ultimately what Fallout 4 as a whole is. Its entire world and story are held together by paper clips, rubber bands, and scotch tape. And the moment you even graze one of them, the entire thing starts to collapse. This finally brings me to the heart of this issue. Emil Pagliarillo. Maybe Todd can be blamed for approving his ideas, in which case he's at fault too. But the core of the issue is Emil's absolute incompetence as a writer. Now I'm not going to say he wrote every single quest or line of dialogue in the game, but he is responsible for the main quest at the very least. He actually did a speech on writing Fallout 4. A number of people have talked about the speech already, including the video I referenced in the last part of this analysis by It's a Gundam, in which he goes over a detailed Reddit post on the subject. I highly recommend his video, but we're going to go over it here as well. Emil Pagliarillo, the lead writer for Bethesda, and has been since Fallout 3, coincidentally around the time where their writing started taking a nosedive, a professional writer cannot even manage to keep himself on track in a speech he himself wrote and presented. His entire presentation is a meandering, rambling, disjointed mess, not so different from the stories he writes.
But really, I've been known as the Fallout guy, sort of. My first big gig at Bethesda was as lead designer and writer of Fallout 3, and then most recently Fallout Shelter, which just sort of came out of nowhere and was a big hit for us, and in Fallout 4, the most recent thing I worked on. So what's the story with Bethesda stories? How do we make our stories, and how do I personally make my stories? I thought, it's funny, I had never really thought of the process that I use to write stories and make games, and then I realized I do have a process.
After some pointless bullshit, he introduces 3 writing concepts.
The first is KISS. Keep it simple, stupid. This is my own personal rule for myself, right? And I'll go through each of these individually. The next, write what you know. One of the oldest tricks for writing, right? Write what you know, it's true. And 3, this is a big one. Great games are played, not made. This is one of Bethesda's studio mottos, but this is a personal motto for me as well.
For his section of Keep It Simple, Stupid, he talks about themes, but doesn't seem to properly understand it, talking only in either basic or vague terms. Themes are absolutely an important part of writing a story, but when it comes to Skyrim, he says it's about dragons, but not really. It's about the lone hero, and goes so far to say it's almost biblical, that the Dragonborn is something of a messiah. But he doesn't elaborate on the subject. He throws up some slides and says a movie or a game is about something that moves on. This is a good parallel to his story writing skills. We hit some surface level details that are never expanded upon or developed. What's Casablanca about? It's about love, but in reality it's about sacrifice. Great, can you tell me more? No, he just moves to the next example. Same absolutely applies to his story writing, even in examples I've already provided. Something happens, and you're pushed along to the next quest. Don't question it, don't ask the why, just move on. I never once felt like I was the messiah when playing Skyrim. I felt like some asshole in a world that was designed around me existing. You want to talk about the hero's journey? Look at fucking Morrowind. You start off as a nobody, the locals hate your guts, you're weak. But as you grow, as you level up, as you accomplish things, finally you fill the Nerevarine prophecy, and people are nervous being around because you're an actual living, breathing messiah to them. In Skyrim, you kill a dragon 20 minutes into the game, are proclaimed the Dragonborn, and guards tell you to stop shouting as if you're a hooligan stepping on the grass in front of a "Don't Step on the Grass" sign. The lone hero isn't even a theme of Skyrim, it's more Bethesda's style of game design, of playing a lone free character. In fact, Skyrim specifically has companions that can follow you around, so is it even the lone hero at that point? Morrowind barely has companions. Some escort quests, sure, and a bodyguard you can hire in Mournhold, but that's about it. Morrowind is closer to the theme of a lone hero. He then says Fallout 4 is about synths. Or is it? And begins listing off a few surface level aspects, then says the most important theme in Fallout 4 is suspicion.
The theme, this became a very important point for us, and is something that we didn't realize until a little late in pre-production. The most important theme in Fallout 4 is suspicion. Who is this person sitting next to me? Are they human? Do they want to do me harm? which is a theme that is very relevant in the world today, right? You know, am I human? What are my own motivations? And so that, when you look at the themes of Fallout 4, that was most important to me.
Maybe I'm alone here, but I never viewed who is or isn't a synth as a level of suspicion because I never had a reason to. If they got up and started shooting me, they were just another nameless enemy to kill. Were they a threat to my settlements? Cool. One of my nameless NPCs is killing the other nameless NPCs, or shooting at invincible named NPCs. Why should I care? Especially when there's literally, once again, no substance to it. Oh, a synth joined my settlement and went berserk? Okay. There's also the fact that most of the named NPCs in the game as a whole barely have a personality to begin with. They have personality traits, but they're not actually developed characters. The shopkeeper who hates synths, what is her personality? She's paranoid. Cool. Anything else? She's paranoid. Right. Suspicion in this way is basically impossible without the player being invested, and there's not enough depth to the world or characters for the player to properly get invested. But more than that, we've already seen our investment is meaningless by the lack of choices in the world. There's a scripted encounter in which a man is holding his brother at gunpoint to Diamond City, paranoid that his brother is a synth. The encounter quickly ends with the nameless Diamond City guard killing the man and telling everyone else to move along. There's nothing you can do. The surviving brother is immediately made irrelevant. This encounter almost always happens the second time you enter the market area of Diamond City, so you don't have a chance to meet and learn about these characters, and it's presented in a way that's supposed to be dramatic or important. Again, it's another one of these Kodak moments for Bethesda, where they try to show something to the player that just feels fake and forced. Let's talk a bit more about the phrase, "keep it simple, stupid," though. This is a pretty good phrase. I like it, as it applies to, well, just about everything. Except fucking story writing. See, the basis of saying this is in the fact that the more complicated something is, the more likely error or issue will arise as a result. To give an extremely simple example, it's the reason why, when I owe someone money, I pay in the largest bills possible. Let's say I owe someone $100. I'd far rather pay with two $50 bills than with five $20 bills. The math is the same either way, $100 is $100, but with less bills, there's less chance of one of them getting lost or misplaced, or in a situation has actually happened to me, getting the wrong bill and not realizing until it's too late. As far as this phrase goes, it absolutely does not apply to story writing. In the creation of fiction, the more complex and detailed the world, events, and characters are, the better. This makes the worlds feel more real. It gives them depth and complexities that we can see every day in our own world. A developed character with personality traits, a backstory, reasons for doing things the way they do, and an actual personality is infinitely more interesting than Bethesda's one-note characters that seem to be based around a single trait. Worlds where there's established history, reasons for locations existing in the way they do, reasons for factions to exist, and goals for them to strive for, help them stand out as existing with purpose, despite being fiction. These details not only make these worlds interesting, but it also makes them unique and memorable. For a counterexample, let's say I make a simple fantasy world with humans, elves, and dwarves, and the bad guys are orcs and goblins. I'm sure anyone watching can name 100 titles that this bare description applies to. And for the record, some really creative things have been done due to various constraints that require something to be simple. But the issue here is his ideas of keeping stories simple, which I don't even fucking know if he actually applied this to Fallout 4, since it's one of the most complexly awful stories you could possibly come up with. It's very clear that ML is unable to write regardless of complexity. And before anyone brings up the Dark Brotherhood from Oblivion, yeah, ML is responsible for that. And while it is one of the better parts of the game, it is also really kind of overrated and less to do with his writing skill, more to do with the quality of the individual quests, especially the fan favorite Whodunit. See, the majority of the Dark Brotherhood story is actually minimally presented. You join, do some missions killing random people, Then Lucian advances you to be his underling, starting with the purging of the sanctuary due to a traitor. Then you do his dead drops, and after a few, he confronts you, telling you that you've been killing Brotherhood members this entire time. Dun dun dun! He has you investigate the next dead drop, which ultimately doesn't really lead to much, since it's mostly just an excuse to get him away from you, so he can be killed by the other members of the Dark Brotherhood. When you return to meet with him and find him dead, the other members are planning to talk to the Night Mother. When you do so, the traitor reveals himself and is killed. What saved this was, as I said, the quality of the quests as well as the personalities of the characters involved. While still a little shallow for my tastes, far superior to anything Fallout 4 had. Once again, this could have been far more interesting if you actually had to seek out evidence and clues to learn who the traitor is. Anyways, back to the stupid speech and its next point. He talks about write what you know. He uses washing dishes as a counterexample of what he means, then he makes a joke that he thinks a game about washing dishes would be fun. He then shows one of the most recognizable faces of anime and says most people might not recognize him. I don't even need to comment on how fucking retarded this is. I'm not a weeaboo. There's only a handful of anime I've ever actually enjoyed and I still know who this guy is.
He had said that the state of anime currently was going downhill.
The state of video games have been going downhill for years. You're part of the problem. He continues to use this as an example of write what you know. The people have stopped observing in anime, and Emil says what this means to him is to draw from personal experiences. He rambles a bit on the creation of the Dark Brotherhood and says he based it off Christianity, that the Dark Brotherhood's beliefs are the evil versions of Christianity. Sithis is the evil version of God, and the Night Mother is the evil version of the Virgin Mary. He rambles more about the creation of Fallout 4 in Boston, lists some places he knew, and says he even put his bedroom from when he was a kid into the game. Not sure what this has to do with story writing, but okay. He keeps saying he's working from personal experience on Fallout, then says the game is based on two people, himself as a kid and Johnny Depp. I assure you, the level of frustration I'm experiencing right now is immense. He then corrects that to be a character Depp played in a movie based on real life, James Whitey Bulger, a mafia boss. He explains that no one knew what he looked like, and for him as a child, this mob boss was the boogeyman, the monster in the closet. He then says he used this experience to write about the Institute, the Commonwealth's monster in the closet that you don't see. He directly says the Institute is James Whitey Bulger. He concludes that write what you know simply means draw from your personal experience, and takes a lot of inane rambling to get to this point. He then moves on to the final point. Great games are played, not made. More rambling, he pauses a lot and says it has several meanings. He then says a couple interesting things. They're very flexible and don't have a lot of design documents. They had to get stuff into the game, play it, and change it. He basically says their design philosophy is constantly iterating. More rambling, he says it's difficult for him to play his own stuff. What a coincidence! I find it fucking difficult to play your stuff too. More fucking rambling, he talks about how writing a game is different from a movie or a novel, then gets distracted by showing images of his co-workers? While saying quests aren't just designed by the writing team, but also character artists, world artists, and so forth. He then explains much of what I'll be talking about in the next video. He then gets distracted from his distraction with an MS Paint drawing saying one of his co-workers was camera shy. She had the right idea not appearing in this presentation. He repeats the played not made line again and rambles again, while switching to an image from Star Wars. He says they always try to start big, tell a huge story. They want their next games to be as epic as The Great Gatsby, or Moby Dick, or The Scarlet Letter. He throws in a line about getting Liam Neeson to voice the father in Fallout 3. This is getting to the point I referenced in the last part of this analysis. He starts rambling again about how they put in all this work into their stories. Yeah, fucking right. To make this true, epic. But they have to keep the player in mind. And what is the player going to do? Ignore the story and shit all over it. Making paper airplanes, as he says. because they're going to spend all their time building shacks and hunting for bobbleheads, and they're never going to see the story. This sounds like an excuse for poor writing. He says the greatest characters are the players, then shows a bunch of cosplayers and say they're making it for them. He then goes on about how important characters, interaction, and narrative choice are. Sir, are you aware of what game you created? He then goes into the dialogue system and how they looked at their own games, as well as other games praised for their narrative choice, like Mass Effect and Telltale. I haven't played any significant amount of Mass Effect games, but I have played a number of Telltale's games, and things began to make a bit more sense here in terms of lack of choice. Telltale's games, despite being based all around your actions having meaning, have very little choice and rare outcomes. For example, in Season 2 of The Walking Dead, you can prevent one of your group members, Nick, from dying in Episode 2. He immediately becomes absolutely irrelevant. He has barely any lines, if any, of non-optional dialogue, and maybe 1 or 2 lines of optional dialogue. He then gets separated from the group and shows up dead. Your choice to save him is made meaningless through him being made irrelevant. The only difference your choice ultimately has is if a character's model is loaded into a couple scenes or not. The discussion of Fallout 4's dialogue system is for a future video, though. He then says this.
And I've lost track, but Fallout 4 has something like 120,000 lines of spoken dialogue, and I think 40 or 50% of that is actually the player character dialogue.
There are over 120,000 lines of spoken dialogue, 40 to 50% of which are by the player. Maybe that 40 to 50% would have been better used on, I don't know, literally fucking anything else? Make more interesting characters. Make some choices actually matter. Do something with it. But no! Once again, Bethesda does nothing with it. The voiced protagonist adds nothing of value to the game, and in fact is a detriment. More rambling from Emil before he moves on to discussing the implementation of the 4-choice system was a nightmare for the designers, forcing them to create 4 responses to absolutely everything, no matter how complex or simple, and as a result had taken a lot of time. More of Fallout 4's shortcomings are beginning to make more sense. He rambles about not wanting to drop lore bombs, and that they try to tell stories through environmental details. More rambling, then he talks about a quest in Fallout 4, one with a bit of choice, and he says how it's such a shame that most of his co-workers' work will never be seen because of that. Motherfucker, if every aspect of the game had choice, that would add replayability to it, therefore giving people a reason to play through again. But no, one of the biggest choices in the game is made irrelevant because 3 of the main factions all have the same fucking ending, and the only reason the 4th faction doesn't have the same intro to the same ending cutscene is because it would make no sense for the Institute to blow themselves up. He just ends it there, before moving on to the Museum of Witchcraft quest, which, once again, he fucking rambles a lot. Finally, he says you fight a Deathclaw, one of the scariest monsters in the game. That's it. That's the quest, and he calls it great. More rambling, he mentions Preston's endless fucking quests, then talks about Paladin Dance. He says they had an idea where you could kill Elder Maxon and become the leader of the Brotherhood. This idea is so fucking insanely stupid, I'm surprised it didn't make it into the game. No, it does not sound fucking great. He then talks about Nick Valentine, our little microcosm from earlier. Then he fucking says this.
And sometimes, the player wants to throw their paper airplanes, they want to build their shacks. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they actually want to experience a story all at once.
No fucking shit, Sherlock. He then makes some nonsensical comparisons between games and movies. There's a dude dressed up as a baseball player in The Warriors. You can play that. There's Leonardo DiCaprio getting attacked by a bear in The Revenant. That's your narrative in Skyrim. How about the Red fucking Wedding from Game of Thrones?
Your Grace. I feel I've been remiss in my duties. I've given you meat and wine and music, but I haven't shown you the hospitality you deserve. My king has married, and I owe my new queen a wedding gift.
You can play that in Skyrim too. I didn't even realize this quest was supposed to be a reference to that. This has got to be the most flaccid reference to anything ever. To end his speech, he goes over his main points again. On Write What You Know, he actually says there's so many stereotypical characters now because no one is looking at real people. Again, are you aware of what game you made? Fallout 4 is nothing but stereotypes. Characters based entirely off of one personality trait. The paranoid merchant, the noble detective, the bad guy crime boss, the dangerous mercenary. None of these are developed beyond their most basic forms. His final conclusion is, if you do all that, you can eventually see your work on store shelves, and the true mark of being a game developer is waiting for the reviews to come in, reading the reviews, and if you're lucky, ignoring the reviews. How fucking mature. I just watched this full video for the first time while writing this, and my god, it was painful to suffer through. But now a lot of the issues with the game begin to make more sense. Based on everything we've seen, my conclusion is this. Their team was disorganized and didn't consult each other on what they were doing. They also didn't reference the existing lore or history to stay accurate to it, unless it was convenient. They also had the idea for this twist where your son is an old man by the time you meet him. I absolutely believe they started there and built everything up around that. First, let's talk about the lore issues again really quickly. We already know this is not an issue to Bethesda, as they're willing to rewrite anything to suit themselves, such as the Brotherhood of Steel having a chapter in West Virginia in Fallout 76. Pete Hines tried to write this off in a strange statement, which I think a lot of people misunderstood. But I didn't. He said, "Our developers take things like lore and canon seriously, and if they're going to do something, they're going to make sure there's a real and defensible reason for it. We have proven with Elder Scrolls games, we're willing to say, well, lots of people will say things happened one way, and then the opposite or something else could entirely be true. So there's no question that we've gone back to change things to fit what the developers have wanted to do, and not be beholden to something somebody wrote 20 years ago, even in franchises we created, like the Elder Scrolls." Now let me break this down so people who are confused by this statement can understand what he meant here. First off, he's using the same doublespeak he did with the Creation Club. It's not paid mods, but it's not DLC either. They're like mini DLC. This is to worm out of being labeled as paid mods or straight up DLC, both of which would cause people to be angry. People were angry, in fact, but Bethesda just ignored it. He starts out saying that they care about lore and canon, but then goes on to say that they won't be beholden to something someone wrote 20 years ago and are willing to change it. It's showing a clear disregard for lore consistency. It's literally saying,
"Whatever, I'll do what I want."
I think most people understood that aspect. The part that confused people was right in the middle. Well, lots of people will say things happened one way, and then the opposite or something else can entirely be true. This is referring to how the world internally remembers things. That is to say, characters might hold contradictory records of historical events within the world. A good example of this is Morrowind. Part of the story behind Morrowind is what happened to Lord Nerevar in a major historical event. Now, I'm not going to explain the entire history here, but I'll try to sum it up as quickly as possible and get to the point of contradicting histories. The Chimer were a race of elves that migrated to Morrowind. There they came into conflict with the native Dwemer. Eventually peace was made for a time until the Chimer learned that Dwemer had the heart of a god and were willing to exploit it for power. This led to a massive war. One of the greatest Dwemer minds created tools used to tap into the heart's power, but he made a mistake in using them that resulted in the entire Dwemer race being eradicated in an instant. As I recall it, Nerevar and Vorin Dagoth were at Red Mountain at the time of the battle, when the Dwemer were all killed by the heart's power. Upon discovering the tools with his friend, he decided to consult his council, Vivek, Almalexia, and Sothasil. And together, they made a vow to Azura to never use the tools. Nerevar returned to Red Mountain to find Vorin had been driven mad by the heart and was forced to fight and kill him. This is where the historical records get messy. Some accounts say he died there from his wounds. Some say he died earlier, after the battle with the Dwemer. Some say he was betrayed by his council and killed by them so they could use the tools to attain their godhood, for which Azura cursed the race of the Chimer to have grey skin and red eyes, the Dunmer as we see them now in-game. The fact is, the historical records aren't reliable due to conflicting reports and accounts. Vivek himself says he did not kill Nerevar, but he could just as easily be lying, and who would question a living god? Now this might seem a bit of a random tangent for a video about Fallout, but I'm positive a situation like this is what Pete Hines was referring to, where the recorded history isn't always true and in contradiction with other accounts, which could be interesting if handled right, like it was with Morrowind. See, Morrowind was seemingly designed around allowing the player as much option as possible as to who their character are, despite having little to no choice in quests in the game. It's set up that you could be the true reincarnation of Nerevar, or you could be a puppet of Azura getting vengeance upon the Tribunal, or even that you just don't know, but they let the player decide for themselves. Likewise, this works well with the death of Nerevar himself, as it allows the player to decide for themselves which version of the events was how their character originally died before being reincarnated many ages later. The problem with trying this in Fallout is the fact it's an entirely different world, and shit like that doesn't fly as easily. There's many computer records of events happening, and beyond that, there's what we see in-game ourselves. No amount of history being recorded incorrectly will nullify the fact that ghouls need water to live at Necropolis in Fallout 1, and Fallout 4 retcons that with Kid in a Fridge. We know for a fact that the Brotherhood was an isolationist group because they didn't trust the dirty simpleton outsiders with extremely advanced technology. Yet, Fallout 76 says they had a satellite that allowed them to contact a random group of people across the country to start a new branch of the Brotherhood. Pete is trying to cover the shitty writing with the excuse that characters within the world might just be wrong, or history might be remembered incorrectly, and it doesn't work when it's fundamentals of the series being changed to accommodate their bullshit. Back to the game being centered around the twist mentioned earlier, I honestly do not believe any other way the story could come to exist the way it has. The twist is such a centerpiece in the story that it seems obvious that it was the starting point, and they just worked around it. Or, more realistically, the actual starting point was that monster in the closet ML talked about earlier. The Institute is the Commonwealth's unseen enemy, their monster in the closet. The problem then becomes making the player invested in finding this monster in the closet. For this purpose, you're given a son for them to kidnap. It's at this point I think they decided to do the twist, which only made things harder for themselves, because it then became harder to explain away everything that happens leading up to the reveal. Everything is just ass-pulled and crammed together in an attempt to string together a story that makes sense for the twist reveal. Now they've got all this set up and reveal that Father is really your son. Now the story needs a conclusion of some kind. As explained, the Minutemen have the bare minimum of a conclusion. The Institute attacks, then you nuke them. The other factions are just busy work for them to have their own methods of nuking the Institute, or, in the Institute's case, wiping out the Railroad and the Brotherhood, as well as securing their power supply. There's very obviously a litany of issues with Bethesda regarding their game design as a whole. From story writing to quest design to character development to lore accuracy and literally just everything else. The script for this video is over 30,000 words already, so I don't believe I need to repeat myself to give examples as I've been giving them this whole time. Nothing that Bethesda says as a company should be trusted. Nothing that Bethesda writes into its stories or lore should be accepted as fact, since they've proven they don't care and are willing to break it as much as possible to get their own way with their shitty stories. I see people trying to defend the changes using new lore additions from Fallout 4 and 76. I hate to break it to you, but you're trying to stop a ship from sinking by trying to plug the hole with the iceberg that caused it in the first place. I've had people regurgitate Bethesda's lore excuses to me, such as the Brotherhood satellite, to explain them being in 76, as if simply inventing something for the sake of shoving a faction into a new game is good writing. Fallout 4 isn't a Fallout game. It's a Fallout themed game. It's a theme park with a Fallout coat of paint. I've said it before, I'll say it again. Bethesda does not care about the quality of the products they're making anymore. They care about marketability, mass market appeal, and merchandising, and they'll strip out or trample anything necessary to do so. They didn't buy Fallout because they thought it was an interesting series and wanted to add to it. They bought Fallout because there was an established name to sell and create tons of merchandise of. If you really don't believe me when I say they don't care, I've got a final piece of evidence for you. Jared Johnston says, "So is this going to be changed in a patch? Jet is a post-war drug. It did not exist until Fallout 2. Pete Hines responds, doesn't say what year that was posted. Right away, he's not even bothering to look into it or check it out. Jared's not done. It was in a Vault-Tec HQ by a Dr. Reed for the Vault experiment with drugs. Has to be pre-war. There's also the Kid in a Fridge quest, where a ghoul kid survived 200 years in a fridge without food or water. How'd he do that?" Pete Hines responds again, not interested in discussing how realistic things are in an alternate universe post-apocalypse game with talking mutants and ghouls. Holy fuck! What's with the hostility, Pete? For anyone who isn't aware, Pete Hines is the vice president of Bethesda Softworks, and he's in charge of PR and marketing. And this is how he's responding to a customer and fan of the games? Not by looking into an actual lore issue, but by getting hostile and rude? Ignoring the valid points being raised and hand-waving the issue because it's an alternate universe post-apocalypse game with talking mutants and ghouls. He was looking for the quickest excuse to not have to deal with this. That alone should tell you the level of respect these people have for Fallout. Not just the fact that they're ignoring major lore issues they themselves caused, but also by essentially viewing it as nothing more than just a silly post-apocalypse game, so realism doesn't matter, even though realism wasn't the issue. The person who manages PR is essentially trying to represent the company in the best light possible. If your PR guy, not to mention vice fucking president, has so little care for one of your intellectual properties that he's getting rude with customers for asking genuine questions, hand-waving those issues at the earliest moment of convenience, and reduces one of the greatest RPGs ever made to a post-apocalypse game with talking mutants. That seems pretty indicative of the general feeling towards the series internally. If you think things are bad now with Fallout 4 and 76, then they're only going to get worse from here. I'm sure their future releases are going to be so bad that, despite everything I've said here, I'll be looking back on Fallout 4 with nostalgia in a decade, because it may have been a massive pile of shit, but it'll probably look like a goddamn masterpiece next to their future releases, and that's really the worst part. Their desecration of this series isn't over. Now, while I don't intend on copying anyone else's work, this part is going to be very reminiscent of Mr. Caption's rant that he ended his No Tods, No Masters video with. I'm not quoting it or paraphrasing it because I have additional things to say as well, and I don't want to misattribute my own words to Caption, or vice versa. I'm not saying any of this because I hate Fallout or Elder Scrolls. I'm not saying any of this because I hate things that are new, which is a stupid fucking argument, by the way. I love these two franchises. They're some of my all-time favorite works of fiction. I don't want to be sitting here making a fucking 10-hour video series on why Fallout 4 is bad. I would so much rather be enjoying these games for being well-written and fun games. I'd rather be discussing the lore and characters and factions and the choices and consequences. I want there to be new and good Fallout and Elder Scrolls games. I'd love to be getting hype as fuck for any news or announcements regarding them, getting a new chapter in these worlds I love so much, learning more of the lore and seeing new locations. But that's not the reality we live in. Bethesda used to be my favorite game company. As a kid, it was my dream to work there on the Elder Scrolls. It was Bethesda and Morrowind that set me on my course in life, my dream to make video games, a dream I'm currently pursuing. My harsh, angry criticisms don't come from a place of hatred, they come from a place of love. I hate Fallout 4 for its multitude of issues, disregard of lore, the shallowness and what it did to the series overall. But I love Fallout, and I want to see it be the best it can be. But we'll probably never see that. I've lost all faith and trust in Bethesda. They've constantly dumbed down their games, removing what made them great. They've focused on irrelevant bullshit like modeling every single button in game.
And it all starts with an obsession to detail. Our artists concept every button, every blinky light, not just on one terminal, on all of them. Because it's our belief that it's all of these small details coming together that form a much, much larger whole.
Adding detail in all the wrong places. I'm sorry, Todd. All those modeled buttons don't make up for the train wreck that is the story on any level. We've seen year after year after year after year where Fallout 3 has 200 endings. Howard comes out on stage and lies to everyone's faces. Elder Scrolls Blades is a true Elder Scrolls experience? I don't seem to remember Morrowind or Oblivion being microtransaction-infested, pay-to-wait mobile trash. I'm done with Bethesda. I see no reason to buy their games or to continue to support them as long as they intend on putting out these shit games like Fallout 4 or Skyrim. And honestly, I don't want to subject myself to them. In other words, like Mr. Caption said a few years ago, you have lost a customer. Unless you radically change how you make your games, I won't be coming back. Starfield? Elder Scrolls 6? What's the point? It's probably going to be poorly written and contradictory like Fallout 4 was. Lore issues being hand-waved in a tweet instead of being addressed. Because why should I expect anything different?
How does it feel to have lived long enough to see all of your favorite franchises go down in flames?
Thank you to everyone who actually watched and listened to this entire thing. Once again, I don't know when the next part of this will be out, but I wouldn't expect it anytime soon. As it is, I've got a full-time job to contend with, as well as a number of other personal projects and responsibilities, so it might take a bit. But the next part will definitely be in the works. I might be taking a bit of a break as well, or maybe I'll do some other videos in between, I'm not sure yet. Either way, I'll be around. I check my channel every few days. Thank you again.